Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Sunshine Coast Regional District Committee of the Whole for Thursday, September 22nd, 2022. We have an action-packed agenda today, and I know we've got a lot of people that are waiting to watch and to listen. So I am going to officially call us to order at 9:31 a.m. here. And I would like to acknowledge that the Sunshine Coast Regional District operates on the traditional territories of the Squamish and the Shuswap First Nations. We have, as I said, a very action-packed agenda today. And before we adopt our agenda, I'm just going to look to directors and staff to see if there are any other items that need to be added to this agenda. I see no hands up, so I'm going to ask for a motion to adopt the agenda as presented. So moved and seconded. All those in favor? Thank you. Motion carries. I'm also going to ask for a motion to receive all delegation materials, all reports, and let's see, do we have, just hang on one second, correspondence, receive all documents. So if I could have a motion for that, please. So moved and seconded. Thank you. All those in favor? Thank you. Motion carries. Up first, we do have a delegation from BC Transit, Rob Ringma and Frank He. But before that, I'm going to put this over to our GM of Community Services, Shelley Gagnon, to introduce the delegation and staff report. So Shelley, over to you, please.
Thank you, Chair, and good morning, everybody. I am pleased to be here this morning. As part of the annual planning cycle and in alignment with the Transit Future Action Plan, which the Board adopted back in April of this year, as a planning tool, I am very pleased to bring you my first ever 3-year Transit Improvement Program priorities. To introduce these priorities, I am joined in person by representatives from BC Transit, whom I've worked with now for almost 16 months, but have met for the first time in person today. So it's quite a treat. I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Ringma and Mr. He. Mr. Ringma is the Senior Manager Government Relations with BC Transit, and Mr. He is a Transit Planner with BC Transit as well. After their brief presentation, where they'll introduce the priorities, we will both be here and available to answer any questions that you might have. Thank you, and over to you.
All right. Thank you, Shelley, for that introduction. And yes, it's, to be quite honest, this is my first trip on the road in probably 2 years. So it's great to get back out into the market. Frank and I were in Powell River yesterday, actually, and then came over. We were in Powell River 2 days ago. Came over yesterday, took the Sultry Bay to Earls Cove Ferry, drove the routes all the way in. Frank rode some buses yesterday. Saw a beautiful sunset down at the beach. So it's great to get back out into the systems, get to see everybody face to face. So we're glad to be here today. So without further ado, I'll get into the presentation. Just do this and do this. Looks pretty good on my end. Okay, I think we're okay. I think we can just go through like this. It should still. Yeah, I did start it, unless I have to. I'm sharing my screen, and it's showing on mine, but for some reason, let's try this. Let's try this one here. I apologize.
Is that because you have to share another screen?
Okay, we can do it this way. We'll do it a little bit more manual, just so we can keep things on track here. So as mentioned, I'm Rob Ringman, I'm the Senior Manager of Government Relations. I'm joined here with Frank He. He's our transit planner for the region. And as Shelley has mentioned, last time we were in front of the board, we spoke about the Transit Future Action Plan, which this board adopted. That is our kind of longer term strategic planning document. Today, what we're here to talk about is actually how we translate those larger priorities and strategy into actually an implementation plan for the district. So today we're just going to quickly cover a ridership update. I'll talk a little bit about that transit improvement program. So that's that framework for implementation, and then we'll take your questions. And I'll turn it over to Frank to speak a little bit about ridership.
Oh, okay, thank you. Thank you, Council, for the opportunity to be here. And here the graph has shown the provincial ridership as a whole. And as we see the COVID impact is diminishing, in 2022, we've witnessed actually a very strong recovery across the whole province. And the total ridership actually recovers to approximately 78.5%. And as we are heading into the school season this September, we're actually hitting a high of 86% last week. So it's a really, really good indicator that our passengers now again starting to use our transit system to do all their daily trips as well. Next, please. And how does the Sunshine Coast do? So here is the graph that shows the Sunshine Coast ridership as a whole. And we've actually seen a pretty similar trend across the whole system. And starting in 2022, there is actually a pretty strong recovery for the ridership in Sunshine Coast. And we've actually seen in some of the weeks, we're actually exceeding the ridership prior to COVID, which is pretty good. But then we've seen there is a decline, a dip in the ridership, which we think it might be due to the low tourism activities. And I myself is grateful that I have the chance actually to ride the Route 90 yesterday all the way to Landau Ferry Terminal. And the ridership I've seen on the bus is actually pretty exciting. And I've seen more than 20 people was actually riding the bus. And yet only 2% actually used the Landau Ferry Terminal as their final destination, which means that most of the people will actually use our transit system to do their local trips. And back in September, we actually see a really quick response that our ridership jumps again. And we're actually now approximately 73% of pre-COVID level, which is pretty close to the provincial level. And also furthermore, as the community spine, the Route 90 was still contributed more than 55% of the total ridership, which is why we are so focusing on how we can improve the service, not only because of the ferry, but also because our local people are also using this as their daily drivers. And now I will pass it to Rob to talk more about our transit improvement program.
Thank you, Frank. Yeah, and I think you can definitely see that summer period and maybe where tourism levels aren't quite where they were pre-COVID. So that's why our ridership's a little bit lower in the summer, but it's great to see that September spike where we actually surpassed last year and we're getting closer and closer to pre-COVID levels. So it's very positive indicators. So I want to talk a little bit about the Transit Improvement Program. We also call it TIPS. We hear that acronym quite a bit. And it basically takes those long-term kind of planning, strategic goals and translates those into actual initiatives that can get put into circulation in the transit system. So how we do that is we take the first 3 years of initiatives from the Transit Future Action Plan and we put that into a 3-year transit improvement program document or MOU. We cost out those initiatives so that the board can see what those different improvements will cost, and then we seek your endorsement and approval of those costs. And so then what we can do is we can take your MOU and sum that up into our funding request to the province to get the matching funds for those initiatives. And as I mentioned, the Transit Future Action Plan that this board's endorsed provides pretty clear initiatives for the next several years, and that's what we've tried to replicate here. Now, last fiscal, the province did not approve expansion requests. They approved our base level budgets, but for a myriad of different reasons, still coming out of COVID, quite a few infrastructure costs that were incurred by the provincial government, they did not approve additional expansion requests. That could happen in future years. We still are dependent on the provincial side of the funding, but in order for us to activate the request to the province, we need your endorsement today on some of the costs that are involved here. Once we have that MOU and that endorsement, then that allows us to take that to the province. So other thing I just want to mention in the MOU that's included in your package, you will see year 1, year 2, and year 3. What we're really looking for endorsement on is the year 1 initiatives. Year 2 and year 3, we will bring those back to you next year. We may, working with staff, we may adjust them based on your feedback, we may adjust them. But the commitment that we're seeking today is really on the year 1. So I'm going to show you year 2 and year 3, but really year 1 and the costs involved in year 1 is the key focus for today, because those would be the initiatives that we would be implementing in the next fiscal year. So the first one for the conventional transit system, as Frank had mentioned, is to continue to improve Route 90 frequency. This is going to help increase reliability with connecting with BC ferries. I think I mentioned this to the board before. We actually have to do 4 different riders guides in the Sunshine Coast Regional District, basically kind of piggybacking off BC Ferries schedules changes. If we move more towards this increase in frequency, 30-minute frequency between 6 a.m. and 6 p.m., it's actually going to allow us to decrease the amount of that kind of administrative work, and for our customers, a more consistent schedule where it won't really matter what ferry they're on. They're always going to be about 30, either will be aligned to the ferries, or they'll only be 15 to 30 minutes away from the next bus that would pick them up. And as Frank had mentioned, we talk a lot about BC Ferries and tourism. Clearly, we have a lot of local ridership on the Route 90, so moving that frequency to 30-minute frequency is going to not only help ferry travelers, but it's also going to help the constituents here in the regional district. So what you'll see along the bottom, annual hours to improve that frequency to 30-minute frequency is 1,800 hours. We do estimate how much revenue that we would incur. Basically, we use our 3-year budgeting process to do a calculation on ridership and revenue. And the most important one, though, is the estimated annual net municipal share of costs. So you'll see the total cost at $199,000. But after we apply the BC Transit cost sharing formula and a couple of our credits, we look at a budget of $80,297 as the SCRD's share of the cost of that expansion. The only thing I will also mention is it looks like there's no vehicle requirement with this expansion, so that actually keeps the cost quite in line. I believe we'll be able to achieve this 30-minute frequency with the current fleet that we have. And you'll see in year 2 and year 3, we pretty much are maxing out our bus capacities, and we'll have to look future years at adding additional buses. From a handy dart improvement, it was made pretty clear when we went through the Transit Future Action Plan process that this board was interested in seeing not only increases and expansions to conventional service, but also some handy dart improvement opportunities. From BC Transit perspective, we really look to kind of our guidelines and recommendations to start. And really, when we analyze the handy dart system here in the Central Coast Regional District, we actually have a little bit of misalignment between the conventional system and the handy dart system. The first misalignment is actually we don't provide Sunday service or holiday service for handy dart. So our kind of guidelines and recommendations would be to, number one, in order to move towards aligning with conventional service, number one, go to days of service, the allowable days, and then number 2, start to expand the actual hours per day to better align to the system. So what we've proposed here are 2 initiatives for handy dart. The first one is to introduce handy dart service on Sundays and aligning those Sundays with your Saturday service span, which runs from about 10 o'clock to 3 p.m. And then number 2 is to extend the evening handy dart service on weekdays by 1 hour to 5:30. So currently your handy dart service only runs till 4:30, which is quite early compared to a lot of comparable systems. So we propose to move that to 5:30 just to allow a little bit extra time for any of those afternoon programs, people shopping, medical appointments. It just really allows that extra hour, actually allows a lot more flexibility in our service. And as you'll see here, that will not require any additional vehicles because we're just taking the current vehicle fleet that we have and better utilizing that fleet, adding the Sunday, adding an extra hour service. And those 2 initiatives both come out to about the same number of annual hours, 275, and come each with a cost of about $8,400. So combined about $16,800 for those initiatives. So those are the 2 year 1 initiatives that are the most pertinent for this board to consider today. Moving to year 2, we'll continue with Route 90 improvements and increasing that frequency to 30 minutes all day. So what we're recommending in year 1 is to increase that 30-minute frequency between 6 a.m. and 6 p.m. In year 2, we would actually move that to 30 minutes all day. And then, again, with some discussion with this board through the Transit Future Action Plan process, we're looking at a modification of Route 1 that'll provide limited service to downtown Sechelt. And we're also going to increase Route 2 West Sechelt to 30-minute service at those peak times. So that's the morning and afternoon peaks, Monday to Saturday. So again, what you'll see there, you'll notice the hours, 300 hours and 820 hours. And you'll also notice the 2 buses, and I'd mentioned that in a previous slide. So by doing our Route 90 improvements this year, we will kind of max out the peak capacity of our current fleet. So for year 2, we need to be considering and moving forward with adding additional bus requirements. So again, those translate into estimated net municipal share of costs of $47,217 and $67,011. We will update those costs next year, just to give you, again, a revised costing. But the whole idea of the tips is to make sure that this board is understanding what some of those future financial implications might look like as we continue to improve the transit system. For year 3, there's, again, been a lot of discussion around this board table that I've been happy to be a part of regarding exploring Earls Cove feasibility and also regional transit, interregional transit options. So what we've done working with staff is we're looking to do a feasibility study in partnership where we would assume a portion of the cost to look at service options and costing for expanding service to Earls Cove. And of course, that feasibility would include also stakeholder engagement with partners in the Cathet Regional District and the City of Powell River to look at what the options would be for a more expanded kind of regional service. So we've put $50,000 aside to do that work. Of course, when we use the BC Transit cost sharing formula, that looks like from a SCRD perspective about a $26,655 cost. Sorry, go one more. And last but not least, just wanted to quickly give you an update on electronic fare strategy. I believe the last time I presented to this board, and maybe in our board workshop, I talked a little bit about how we were updating and modernizing our payment strategy. So currently right now, if you want to ride the bus, you either buy tickets or you have to pay cash. We will still accept cash. That's not going to go away. But we are updating our electronic fare payment options to moving to a mobile app. You could use your debit card, your Visa card. We're just going to open up all the options for customers to use payment options for the bus. And of course, we know that as we increase, the reliability and the convenience of transit, we will continue to see some of that ridership that we're looking for. So I think this is a great move. It's a long time coming. Our kind of partners over at TransLink have had the Compass Card program for quite a few years. We're actually kind of leapfrogging that technology where we won't need kiosks where people have to buy Compass Cards. They'll actually have their mobile wallet or their cards on them, and then our system will give us a lot of great back-end data as well in terms of ridership and flow of traffic. So we're going to start rolling out this program in early 2023, and it's going to be a province-wide rollout, and I'm really looking forward to bringing that technology to all of the fleet that we have here in the Sunshine Coast. And that is the end of our presentation. We'll open it up to any questions.
Terrific. Thank you, Rob and Frank. Before I go to questions from the board, GM Gagnon, was there anything you wanted to add? Or okay, perfect. Okay, so board, I'm going to go to Director Howard. We'll start with you and then over to Director Seegers.
Thank you. I'm very glad I'm able to participate in this meeting because I love transit. I use transit. My family uses transit. I think it's essential to a healthy community. I think it's essential to assisting in solving highway congestion, and I'm strongly supportive of expansion. So I really appreciated your presentation, especially the data. I have a couple of questions. I'm curious as to why the focus for the service expansion, which I agree should be focused for the next year on Route 90, is limited to weekdays. I find that that model seems to reflect a bit of an outdated notion of people's work habits and the need for work and other related movement on weekends, particularly how transit falls off a cliff on Sundays. It seems to reflect, a notion of a day long past when everybody stayed home with their family on a Sunday. So I'm interested in why the focus is only on weekdays and whether there can be anything done to support increased transit on weekends. And then in Y year 2, I'm concerned to read that there is a proposal to quote, reallocate hours from Route 1. It was presented slightly differently in your PowerPoint, but at page 11 of our package, it's described as increased weekday frequency on Route 90, reallocating hours from Route 1. I'm concerned about Route 1 being cannibalized to support Route 90. I use Route 1, and many, many people do. And if there was a reduction in Route 1, we're going to be marooning a lot of people. So those are my 2 primary questions right now. Thanks.
Okay. Over to delegation.
Yeah, thank you through the chair. Thank you, Director Howard, for your questions. I'll quickly address a little bit of a non-technical answer, and then Frank, that's why I brought the heavy in here, because he can handle the more technical planning questions. So, yes, I think when we put these initiatives together, we do try to align to the strategic priorities that we identified in the TFAP. We do a pretty good job of calculating how many hours are required for those initiatives. Once the board endorses those initiatives, then we get down to the real nitty-gritty of the planning work to really do the puts and takes. But that being said, totally hear you on the weekend piece, and I think maybe Frank will have a little bit more to add there on the weekends as well as the reallocation for Route 1.
Okay, thank you for the opportunity. Actually, in our TFAP, we do actually have the options for improving Route 90s on the weekends as well. But also, we have to understand that to improve the system, it's not like we just want to take the transit better overnight as a whole. There is planning that we have to do step by step. And based on our data and our analysis, we do believe that weekdays seems to be more jeopardized by the lack of frequencies, and that's impacting our customer experience as well. So we think, okay, maybe we should improve the weekdays and see how those feedbacks come back to us, how those expansions will impact the ridership, and then we can move forward with our options in the weekends. So yes, absolutely, we have options and we have plans for the weekends, but it's more like a step-by-step process that we would like to proceed, especially in a community like Sunshine Coast, where we're just trying to play a bit more cautious in terms of the expansion. And in terms of the reallocation to Route 1, I do know that a lot of people are also using Route 1, but if you are looking at the map, the Route 1 and Route 90 has a huge overlap, and it shares a large portion of its routing. So we are not saying that we are reducing the frequency of Route 1. That's not what we are trying to do. What we are trying to do is that when we are improving Route 90, we are also trying to save some of the hours from Route 1, not decreasing its frequency, but to limit some of its paths from the field road to downtown Seashell. By not providing that section of the service, we are actually harvesting those hours and put them into Route 90 so that people will have better transition. If they still want to travel all the way to downtown, they can still take Route 90, but we are not reducing the frequency. I do understand that frequency is very, very important, but we're just trying to reduce those redundancies for the overlapped route. I hope that my explanation is clear.
Madam Chair, may I just ask one clarifying follow-up?
Yes, I was actually going to ask if you wanted to follow up on that, Director Howard. Go ahead.
Thank you very much. I appreciate the answers, and please tell me if I understand this correctly. the reallocation of hours from Route 1, that is not to reduce the frequency of Route 1 service. It's potentially, for example, Route 1 may reduce the pickups between Field Road and Seashelt because that's redundant service served by the 90. Okay, thank you, that's great.
Next up, I have Director Seegers and then Director McMahon.
Thank you. I didn't have this question on my list, but I'm going to follow up on what Director Howard was talking about. The last transit future plan, or I might have that weird, wrong order, we were talking about having transit hubs. So the bottom of Field Road, for example, was to be a transit hub. And then once we got the Route 90 in place, we would actually have the hub at the bottom, which allowed us to alter routes like the Route 1, etc. Potentially have a route going through Roberts Creek that would feed into the hub and into the spine of the service. Some of the others as well, downtown Seashell, back and forth. So is that still part of the plan, that at some point there will be a hub? And I don't know how far out that is, but I know that's a piece in configuring the whole system.
Thank you.
Delegation, over to you.
Okay, thank you. So definitely the hub was still in the plan, but that was more in terms of a longer term that we are deciding, because we still have to discuss with our infrastructure team. So how we want to proceed with the hub, what will be the design, what kind of frequencies, what kind of amenities we want to have. So that's definitely will be a longer term. But for those services, that's kind of like a more imminent expansion or improvements that we can make to the society, especially for the current tip cycle. So we are still having that plan. It's just like it's not this year.
And if I could, just through the chair, if I could add to that, our current infrastructure priority right now is Mason Yards, and we're working very diligently, staff, seeking, to get a feasibility study and a plan together for Mason Yards so that we can obviously have the room that we need to expand our transit system. But as Frank has mentioned, that is still on the infrastructure priority list. It's just not the most critical one at this point.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay.
Okay, just a quick follow-up then. But
Yep.
if you're going to be implementing this, where you're going to be actually having people transfer at the bottom of the road, there needs to be some infrastructure that will go along with that. So that's short-term. That's not long-term, given the timing.
GM Gagnon, I'll go over to you.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to suggest that it's not a hub. It's just a transfer station. So it's not the acquisition of a great deal of land. It is just an area where a couple of buses can pull up and people can transfer. So in terms of land acquisition, that's not an immediate priority. We can accommodate that transfer station in different ways. So I think when you think hub, you're thinking of a big, multi-bus building, washroom, all that. And that is not, in fact, what this is. This is more of a transfer station. Thank you.
Thank you. That clarifies that. Thanks.
Over to Director McMahon and then Director Beamish.
Right. Thank you for the presentation. I appreciate that we are working with a lot of constraints, including the bus yard. But I continue to be very frustrated by the fact that the people in this room who are making the decisions are not people who are dependent on transit. We do not have an advisory group of transit users, and we only infrequently survey our customers, like once every 5 years, to find out what they want. And then people tell us what they want, and we deliver something else. So I find that pretty frustrating. The evening service, as well as the weekend service, is pretty dismal. I've tried to use it and given up. So I just, it is, I would say, a sort of a colonial patriarchal model of decision-making when we're deciding for other people how they should use our transit system. The feasibility study for Earl's Cove, which we need for sure. So doing that in year 3 means that we are looking at least 5 years before we could possibly put that in, I would guess, because it would need another couple of years of implementation work. So we are basically making the decision to push it a long way down the road. And that concerns me a bit. The other thing that concerns me is the handy dart, because what I have heard anecdotally from people again and again is two things. One is it doesn't connect to the ferries, because people need to go into Vancouver for specialist medical appointments and other errands. And number two, there's no evening service. So they can't go out to, for instance, an all candidates meeting or Gibson's town council, or actually have a social event like go out for dinner. So I'm wondering why Sunday? Like, why would we expand Sunday rather than providing more service on a weekday? Thank you.
Delegation, over to you.
Yeah, thank you through the chair. Thank you, Director McMahon, for the questions. Maybe I'll just kind of try to compartmentalize a couple of them. What I think the board needs to recognize, and I can appreciate your thoughts on a transit advisory committee or a transportation committee in many of the local municipalities and districts I work with, those structures are in place. But I would have to defend the Transit Future Action Plan process and the fact that we did extensive stakeholder and public engagement. The initiatives that we put forward in that plan, working with staff and this board, reflect those comments, feedback from the public. So I can appreciate what you're saying, but I also don't want us to think that the TFAP is a archaic type of format. It's a format we use across the province. It does take in that public feedback. Our challenge still remains getting people to provide that feedback. We need riders as well as non-transit riders to provide us with that feedback. Yep. Riders can give us feedback on how they use the system, but what we actually need to know in a lot of cases is why aren't some riders not using the system? So in that perspective, I 100% agree with you, and I think working forward and working together, we need to try to find a way to bridge that gap. The 5-year Earl's Cove plan, again, it's currently in year 3. I think if this board has discussions and wants to move that up into year 2, that is again a decision that the board can make. I think it's something you're going to want to work with staff on and find out where the capabilities and those pieces lie. But currently it's in year 3, but there is some flexibility there if this board makes decisions down the road to move that up as terms of priorities. And then finally on the handy dart, yes, and I'll be the first to say I had sat in front of this board and committed to putting together a handy dart working group. That didn't come together last year, but I have talked to staff and have committed to this year to actually putting a working group of local stakeholders together to discuss handy dart priorities so that we can really isolate some of those key challenges that they may be experiencing. The proposal that we put in front today is really based on best practices if you go to the American Disability Association or even BC Transit's kind of internal guidelines, it really is trying to move towards, and you kind of brought this up, trying to move towards service parity or equity with the conventional transit system. So step 1, the priority they would outline as step 1 is days of service first, and then increasing the hours of service. So what we tried to do in this proposal was achieve a little bit of both, and maybe we stretched it a little too thin. Maybe we should have done, we could have looked at extending more than 1 hour on evenings, but I think this is a good first step, and based on the costs involved, I think it's a pretty prudent step to just improving the system, and then hopefully we can get further feedback from constituents this year, so that when I come back and sit in front of you next year, we actually have some more robust proposals from a handy dart perspective. So thank you for your question.
Okay. Director Beamish and then Director Hills.
Thank you, and thank you for your presentation this morning. It's good to see this and very timely to see this in terms of planning, and we're in a municipal election, so there's lots of interest in this as well. I have a couple points. So one is, well, first of all, Route 1, I'm glad to see that's going to be increased service and improved service. It does go down through Gibson's, which is important for that area. I take Director Howard's position that I'd like to see it on weekends as well. One of the things that we have heard, we have in Gibson students on council. And in June, one of the students, well, the student who is on council, brought up the issue of transit and brought it up specifically for young people who have jobs. And they said transit does not enable them to get to and from their jobs, so they don't use it. And so that, now if you look at that, a lot of those jobs are going to be weekend jobs. And so we're not improving that opportunity. The second point on that is that there is a group of young people, the Sunshine Coast Youth Committee, who are looking at transit. And they should be consulted. And I'd really appreciate if there's some way that the SCRD, perhaps Director Gagnon could connect in with that. Councillor Kroll, who will be here this afternoon, is very tied in with that, has had conversations with that group. It'd be great if they could receive a presentation and receive this as a part of the consultation and see how does this fit with your needs and expectations of service. Because they're a very important part of our community, just like on the one hand, seniors who need transit, on the other hand, the youth need transit. They need to be specifically consulted, not as part of a survey, because as you know, they'll never go to the survey. And if they're not on the buses, they'll never pick up a piece of paper for a survey. But asking them specifically, does this meet your needs? And if not, how could it be changed? And then thirdly, transit is very important for our strategies for affordable housing. We target affordable housing on transit systems because a lot of the people who are in affordable housing don't have vehicles and rely heavily on transit. And so that looking at that, are you looking ahead at all at the developments in the community in terms of the numbers of new units that are being developed, where they're being developed, and how transit can provide better service? We have in Gibson's, for example, on paper, probably in the neighborhood of 800 dwellings in progress. And the proximity of those, just like building a school. You build a school where the residential are, you need to provide transit in those areas as well, because they are going to be your future users, and they're going to pay for the system going forward. So it'd be great to know that they are being involved, that at least that kind of planning is being looked at. So, but I appreciate it, and Route 1 is important to Gibson's. It's important, though, from I really like to see the young people accessed and have their input into this, and I appreciate that. Thank you.
I'm going to go to GM Gagnon.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to remind, it was a long time ago we were here, it was in April, so I just want to remind folks of the extensive public consultation that was done as part of the Transit Future Action Plan, and specifically we targeted that youth group. And so there was some very specific targets done at the time. We also had members of both District of Sechelt and the Town of Gibson's Planning Department on our advisory committee, which was great because they looked at things like development, where growth is going to happen, affordable housing. So, and we also have forms that we provide to the planning areas within SCRD, DOS, TOG, when they are doing planning for future development, to be able to contact BC Transit to have that discussion. So those are absolutely in the mix, and it's an ongoing discussion. So I think I was very pleased. And when we did the count of the public engagement, we were very pleased with the engagement in terms of numbers in comparison to other Transit Future Action Plan public engagements. It was very high. And especially during COVID, that was, it was good to see. I see all sorts of different sort of ideas the next time we do it in terms of being able to get out and reach people personally, which wasn't necessarily an option during this last Transit Future Action Planning process. So those are things that we'll take with us into the future. But really appreciate the comment, but I did want to re-emphasize that that was very specifically done during the Transit Future Action Plan. That was brought to the board, and then we had a conversation about priorities, and hopefully what you see in front of you is a direct reflection of what you asked us to put us in front of you back in the spring. So thank you for that.
Director Beamish, you had a follow-up?
Yeah, just is it possible, though, in that sense, to go back to that group, especially the youth, and say, okay, here's what we are proposing now based upon the consultation. I mean, that's the ongoing process of that. We heard, we listened, we propose. And this came up in June, and there's conversations, I know, post-June relative to transit with the youth. And now they're back at school. So that's the important thing. So thank you.
Okay, great. Director Hilt and then Director Seegers.
Thanks, Chair, and thanks BC Transit for the analysis. And I think the strength of your analysis was, I remember a little over 2 years ago, you made a prediction. COVID was going to be a blip, and I think to me, keeping that long-term vision with this incremental stepwise is a very thoughtful method of proceeding, and the economies of scale that we get with BC Transit is tremendous, from fuel savings to all kinds of things. So. Thanks for the analysis, and thanks, Frank, for riding the bus there for us locally. So my question is the decoupling of the ferry schedule and the rider guide. We have 4 now. So will this be one rider guide annually now? Is that how it's going to be, or will there be more than one? I'm looking at that consistency for people and how they respond to the scheduling. Thanks.
Delegation, over to you.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you for your comments. And we are definitely aiming to reduce the number of service changes that we have to make in the next year. Whether or not it will only be one, that will still has to be analyzed and be running through our scheduling team, because they are the ones that put in all those blocks, putting all those schedules together. We definitely will be working closely with them. We're trying to determine what's the best for the whole community. But at this stage, because we're only covering from 6 a.m. to 6 p.m., and then we're still having those late night ferries that we might not able to catch at this point. So we may not be able to reduce our replicas of the rider's guide into one, but definitely will be fewer. So that's our aiming goal. Thank you.
Okay. Director Hiltz, follow up, or I can continue through?
I got other questions, but we'll keep moving through the list and come back.
Okay.
Thanks.
I will put you on. I have Director Seegers, Director McMahon, and then Director Hiltz again.
Thank you. I want to follow up on Director McMahon's comment. I had that all written down too about the Handy Dart. And I know that BC Transit, TransLink, the province has actually said service parity is where you're going with Handy Dart and the regular conventional service. I'm going to give you an example. In the District of Sechelt, we have an advisory planning commission, and we want to have somebody who is disabled in a wheelchair on that commission so that they can actually comment on the developments and projects that are moving forward, but they can't get there. Our evenings are in the weekend, or in the evening, our meetings are in the evenings, they can't get there. We did have one person on that committee. Her husband actually worked for the SCRD, and we had to make sure that the evening was late, or the meeting was late enough so that she could actually have him come home and pick her up and bring her to the meeting, and then be available to take her home. So they can't contribute to the community in a meaningful way, and we need them to be able to have a voice at the table. So evenings are important. So I guess my question would be, currently you said you don't know if the province is going to actually be funding expansion. Is that something that we could look at if they are looking at doing that? Because I think there's a need, and I think we would definitely have support to move that forward. But we would need to have budgeting, drivers, all those kinds of things put in place. So that's one. I'll come back for the other one later.
Okay. Delegation, over to you. Or GM Gagnon. Who wants to take that?
We'll let staff go first.
Okay, great. Over to you, Shelley.
And thank you for the question. So the transit improvement process, the board can request us to add something additional to the expansion considerations next year, if that is the will of the board. And we can go back quickly to the drawing board. I will look to my BC Transit partners to see if we can turn that around to be able to include it and get it in the MOU and get the MOU signed. Or we can wait until next spring when we meet again. We can talk about what expansion we want to see in this time next year to add those. The reason that we hadn't actually requested any Handy Dart expansion service. If you remember back in April when we were chatting about what we wanted to see brought forward in the tips, that wasn't a consideration. BC Transit actually brought it forward, so I will give them full credit for the expansion that you see in front of you related to Handy Dart. So if the board wants us to consider something more, we can certainly do that, have that conversation, and turn that around. In terms of whether or not the province will fund it, just for a point of clarity, what BC Transit needs to do is similar to what I need to do right now, which is pull together my 2023 budget requests so that they can go forward to the province, and then the province will determine their budget come March of 2023. If the province decides to provide expansion or more money to BC Transit as a whole, that is when we would see our tips move forward, because we will have committed, and then that we're just waiting for BC Transit for the province to commit. What happened last year was the province didn't give any additional funds to BC Transit, so there was no expansion across the board. So it's not specifically just about Handy Dart, it's about the entire system. So again, I'll just reiterate, if the board wishes for us to consider additional expansion for Handy Dart, we can certainly do that, but I will look to my BC Transit folks, because I know we have some pressing deadlines to get things back in to the province, as well as our own MOU signed, to see how quickly we can turn that around. Thank you.
Delegation.
And through the chair, thank you, Chair Seegers, for your question and follow up. Yeah, evenings. So I agree with everything GM Shelley has said. Again, I think what we need to do, and and I had committed that to the board, and I do apologize for us not executing on that this year, leading into this year's tips. But I think the opportunity is to get those stakeholders together, have a robust conversation about their needs. We can make adjustments for when I come and sit in front of you next year, if we can get that input and that feedback prior to the summer of 2023. So between now and 2023, we'll commit to working with staff to getting those stakeholders together, having some meetings at times that are accessible to them, where we can make sure we get the right people in the room, and just have a very open conversation about the Handy Dart service here. I know it's been an issue that's kind of been bubbling, and sometimes it rises up, sometimes it goes back down. At the end of the day, I agree with what this board's putting forward, is that we need public feedback. We to better understand and I'll say have the data that we need to propose some strong improvements in the Handy Dart system. And I do think they're needed here, and they're needed across the province, to be quite honest, because we're not at the parity levels that our customers who use Handy Dart services deserve. So I think my commitment would be to work with staff, work to putting to that working group together, and coming back to this board prior to this process next year with some very tangible options that have come from that public feedback process. So as GM Gagnon has mentioned, the issue we have before us right now is that we do need to have some sort of indication to the province here coming out of this meeting, or by the end of this month, as to what some of those initiatives we want to move forward on are. I think we've proposed some good Handy Dart options that move us towards that parity, with a commitment to further refining, developing, and working on those initiatives into next year.
Director Seegers, did you have a follow-up for that?
Yeah, thank you. And we'll watch for that Handy Dart user group. That is a piece, and I understand that we could propose it, but if we don't have the business case or have the data behind that, the province won't support that. So I understand why you're taking the steps you are. Thanks.
I have Director McMahon, and then Director Hiltz, and then Director Seegers again.
Thanks. And I do support talking to the Handy Dart users, but also including people who would like to use Handy Dart but haven't been able to, because there are a lot of barriers. Talking of barriers, I realize that a lot of our constraints are outside of our control. BC Ferries comes to mind. And I know that there have been discussions with BC Ferries at different times, and I don't think that they've been very fruitful. But another partner in this whole thing is Moti. And the safety of the bus stops along the highway is a huge issue with people on the Sunshine Coast. Does BC Transit do any active advocacy with Moti about the way they design their roads and how difficult they make it for us to deliver good transit service?
Delegation.
Yes, through the chair. Thanks again, Director, for your question. And yet, on the BC Ferries front, the province has actually moved BC Transit, or encouraged BC Transit and engaged, I should say, BC Transit, TransLink, and BC Ferries to engage in more robust conversations to ensure that all three agencies understand the interdependencies between our services. And at the end of the day, customer service is the number one goal. And regardless of the three unique agencies that we are, at the end of the day, the province has pushed us to recognize that the customer is ultimately the most important person in the room, and that the three agencies need to work together to ensure that there's the movement of people and the allowable movement of people. So more hopefully to come on that front. Again, it's an ongoing discussion and conversation, but agreed. And I think what we're trying to do in this plan here is release ourselves from a bit of that burden from a transit system perspective by improving the level of service. So I don't need to reiterate that. In terms of our relationship with the ministry, of course, the ministry, we have a contribution agreement with the ministry. We work very closely with the ministry. We work very closely with them on infrastructure pieces. Currently, right now, I could use the Sea to Sky example on Highway 99. Lots of kind of challenges in and out of Whistler, trying to get some transit priority lanes and such and so forth. So yes, we do engage with them. They do have a minor betterments program as well that we can work with staff to look to apply for funding for improvements to bus infrastructure. So I think definitely we will continue to work with staff, engage our partners at the ministry to help advocate for some of the challenges that we are very aware of that currently exist. I think some of those challenges did come up through some of our feedback in the Transit Future Action Plan. So.
Okay. Director Hiltz and then Director Seegers.
Thanks, Chair. My question is, I'm not sure if it's the presentation or the report. It's on page 3 of the report. It's about drivers. You need buses, you need hours, you need drivers. And the report mentions, it should be noted. So, okay, I'm noting it. And could you say anything about the additional drivers? I assume that's built into the costing. So why are we noting the additional drivers? Why should I be aware of this part here? Thanks.
Okay. I'm going to go to GM Gagnon about Director Hiltz's noting.
Thank you, and thank you for the question. Yes, my report, my note. I think it's important that we remember, and it's a risk for us that we are challenged to recruit and retain drivers. And so expansion requires more drivers. I believe, I don't know what page of the report, but I think it's about 1.33 FTEs that we are estimating with this expansion, which actually it's not 1.33 people, that's like 3 to 5 people, 3 to 5 drivers. So that is something that I felt it was important to note, and it may be challenging for us to get those drivers to actually fulfill the responsibilities of the expansion. We are obviously optimistic, and we work very hard, and we continue to recruit on a regular basis. But more expansion requires more drivers. Thank you.
Director Hiltz, follow up.
So the relationship between finding drivers of the SCRD and BC Transit, what is the support between the two groups? Thanks.
Thank you for the question. So, of course, in our relationship with BC Transit, and again, I hope I'm going to get this right, but most relationships are triangular in nature. You have the operator, you have the municipality, and then you have your BC Transit. In ours, it's a dual relationship where we act as both the operator and the municipal government. And so we recruit the drivers. They are our drivers. They're members of our staff. It's our responsibility to recruit. We work very closely with BC Transit around marketing and promotion of transit as a whole, but it's really our responsibility around recruitment. So plug to those that are listening. It's a great opportunity, a great career to drive buses, and it's a great organization to work for. So, but it is our responsibility. Thank you.
Okay. Over to Director Seegers and then Director Howard.
Thank you. Where's my list? Route 2. So in your plan, you're looking at 2024 25, increasing frequency on Route 2, and this is just a confirmation. It's increasing frequency on Route 2, West Seashell to 30 minutes during peak periods. I believe that's still only one directional service, and it's not the return service, that will be coming back later. Is that correct?
That is correct.
So the concern is around trellis, right, being up there and staff. So I know, I go by there frequently. The building's pretty much up. So I don't know if this will be sufficient. I just want to kind of flag that for you. That's all.
Okay. Another note to make. Director Howard, over to you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I hope I'm not jumping the gun, but I'm prepared to move adoption of the recommendations on page 1 of Annex A to the agenda.
I think your timing is just magnificent there, Director Howard. Thank you. And I see a second from Director Toth. And are there any other questions or discussion on the recommendation on the floor? Director Seegers.
Thank you. I'd like to make an amendment. I
Okay.
would like to amend, and I don't know what the wording is that you need on this, but we're talking about the feasibility study for Earl's Cove service. So currently, that is scheduled for 2025-26. Feasibility study to provide analysis, can't talk this morning either, on potential service to Earl's Cove and inter-regional connection opportunities. I'd like to move that up, and I'd look to staff and BC Transit to say, what is the time frame that you could actually do that in? Because we need to budget in our budget this fall. It would need to be included in the MOU. Is this something that we could budget and have move forward next year, or are we looking at the year after rather than 2025-26? And I'll put that
Okay.
in whatever the recommendation needs to be.
Okay. GM Gagnon.
Thank you, and thank you for the opportunity to comment. I think it was mentioned earlier, I believe Mr. Rigma mentioned that right now our infrastructure, our priorities are expansion, plus we have a very large feasibility study undergoing. We are actually about to kick it off next week. So I'm very pleased to say we have a consultant on board, and we are kicking off that feasibility study in terms of understanding what our expansion requirements are at Mason Yards. That will come with a fairly significant dollar value, I suspect, over the next 3 to 5 years, as well as significant amount of time, which is one of the reasons that we're just trying to look at what we had capacity for and when. So we looked at, and we talked about in April, you know, in the TFAP, the feasibility study for expansion to Earl Cove is actually 5 years out. We pulled it forward based on the board's request to year 3 to be able to do that feasibility study. If the board wants to pull it into year 2, I just will be quite honest, there's a lot going on, but we'll look at then maybe what we need from a resourcing perspective, a capacity perspective, to be able to meet the various priorities that would be occurring then with the Mason Yard expansion, as well as the road expansions that would be occurring in year 1 and year 2.
Okay, I'm in favor of moving it forward. I know that it's a staff issue in doing that, but then we're also looking at actual implementation, which at this point, we're looking at, 5-6 years. By actually doing the feasibility study early, we can actually look at what the other implications are. So personally, I'd like to see the feasibility study move forward. So 2025-26, we're looking at, what if we pulled it up 2 years? So instead of 23-24, no, 23-24 is what we'd be looking at instead of 25-26.
Okay.
Or 24-25? Yeah. Yeah, right.
Yeah, sorry.
Okay.
Through the chair. Yeah. Sorry, Laurie.
No, go ahead. Go ahead, Rob.
Okay, thank you. 23-24 would be this current year, so 24-25 would be year 2. And
Perfect.
You're proposing moving it from year 3 to year 2.
Yes.
At the end of the day, BC Transit relies on our input from staff on their capabilities to assist. So that would be something the board would need to work out with staff, but there would be no other resistance from BC Transit outside of making sure that we could work alongside staff on that project.
Okay, so I would like to propose an amendment that the feasibility study to provide an analysis on potential service to Earls Cove and interregional connection opportunities be moved from year 3 to year 2. So that would be a 24-25 initiative. And does that need to be reflected in the MOU at this point? It wouldn't. It would come next year, correct?
Okay, and I see that seconded by Director McMahon. Any discussion to the amendment that's on the floor? I have Director Beamish.
Yeah, I guess my question is that the Earls Cove service, what is the priority for it? Is it to provide service connection to the ferry further to Powell River, or is it to provide transit from people from Earls Cove down to Lower Sunshine Coast? Because perhaps if it is objective to provide to the ferry, should we be consulting with Powell River to share that cost for improvement, bringing that forward? So.
I would say that would be up to staff to sort that piece out.
Okay, I'm going to go to GM Gagnon.
Thank you, and that's a great question. In the recommendation, the assumption is that there would be intergovernmental discussions. So when you're looking at up into, Madeira Park, Garden Bay, those are areas around more of a localized service. But going up to Earls Cove, there is the assumption it's sort of a ferry to ferry, which then means that we would like to talk to our friends up in Powell River and Kitat around, their involvement in the study, the feasibility of it. So yes, that is an assumed inclusion. Thank you.
Director McMahon.
Yes, I'm supportive of this initiative. I realize it's not cast in stone until we actually vote budget money. So, let's see if it's feasible to move this forward. Thank you.
Okay. Director Hiltz, to the amendment that's on the floor.
Yes, I was wondering about the timing of that, the details. So this recommendation would that bring a budget proposal? Then is that what would be required? No? Okay.
Sorry if I may, Chair, I'll just,
Go right ahead.
we've been here a while, so I'll just remind how we started. So really what we are asking for today is the adoption of year 1. And that's what you are really committing to with the MOU. Year 2 and year 3 are more from a planning perspective. So what you'll see from me when you look at the recommendation is that the financial plan includes the associated revenues expenses of year 1. So year 2, you won't see that until this time next year. Thank you.
Okay. Any other, anything else on the amendment that's on the floor? Seeing none, I'm going to call the question on the amendment. Does anyone need to have that read back to them, or is everyone clear that it is the feasibility for Earls Cove service be moved to year 2? Okay, so I'm going to call the question on the amendment. All those in favor? Okay, any opposed? Is there any further discussion to the amended motion on the floor? Seeing none, I'm going to call the question. All those in favor of the amended motion that's on the floor? Thank you. Any opposed? Motion carries. Okay. Well, thank you very much to our delegation. Rob and Frank, thank you for coming in and actually being in the boardroom today. I'm sorry I can't be there in person as well to see you, but really appreciate you coming in and presenting in person.
Yes, thank you very much. Thank you to everyone on the board. Much appreciated.
Thank you.
Okay, great. Okay, well, thank you. And I am going to move us on through. We are going to move on through to Annex B, which starts on page 14 of your package and is a significant report from our planning department. And this is our zoning bylaw number 722, consideration of third reading and adoption. And I am going to bring this over to staff. And there's Jonathan and Yuli. That's great. Jonathan, I'm going to assume that you're going to kick this off, and then we've got Yuli as well. So, Manager Jackson, over to you, please.
Thank you, Chair. I'll just start with a couple of quick opening remarks before I pass it over to Senior Planner Yuli Sao. Just on behalf of SCRD Planning Development, I would like to give our thanks for the public feedback that has been received throughout the bylaw development process and help shape Bylaw 722 to better suit the needs of the community. Since the public hearing, staff have further worked to incorporate this feedback to address many of the themes that we heard concerns about. Since many of those concerns did not impact user density, a great deal of feedback was able to be incorporated, while ensuring that key best practices that the bylaw brings forward for consideration are maintained. And with that said, I will turn it over to Senior Planner Yuli Sao to address some of those details and further. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Jonathan, and thank you, Chair. So this report provides a summary of and the response to the feedbacks we received from the public hearing, as well as recommendations on revisions to the bylaw and alternative options to be considered. So as heard at the public hearing, areas of most concern are the public consultation process, the restrictions on home-based business, and residential agriculture, and increased setback from the ocean as well. So this report clarifies the public consultation process that includes multiple phases, events, and communication tools to reach out to the public and gather a wide range of input throughout the course of the project. Revisions to the bylaw are recommended for home-based business to remove customer visitation and delivery restrictions and to relax size allowance, while off-street parking requirement is strengthened. The parcel size threshold are recommended to be lowered to between 1,000 and 1,500 square meters for the keeping of poultry, rabbits, and bees, with a limit on the number and restriction on roosters. There would be no limit for parcels over 1,500 square meters. Bylaw 722 proposes to consistently apply a minimum 15-meter setback from the ocean, which Bylaw 310 currently only requires for Area D. While other areas covered by Bylaw 310 have require a minimum of 7.5 meter setback. So not only have the SCRD members, including both the District of Sechelt and Town of Gibsons, adopted the 15-meter setback in their zoning bylaws, many local governments in BC have moved to adopt these setbacks in most zones, as it has become the new normal for best practice under current climate change conditions. This is also based on research such as the Green Source program and provincially led studies. While some feedbacks was received opposing this change, the increase of the minimum ocean setback to 15 meters for all area is not recommended to be changed back to the existing 7.5 meters. So in order to realize the key benefits of this bylaw on housing, policy alignment, and technical improvements, and to lay the groundwork for future development of planning regulations and policies, staff recommend proceeding with the recommended revisions to the bylaw for third reading and adoption. Thank you.
Terrific. Thank you very much, and thank you. It was a very lively public hearing, and with a lot of commentary. I'm going to look to directors to see if you have any questions. I have Director McMahon.
Yeah, I have a process question. Are we going to do this one piece at a time, or are we going to hop around gaily? What does the chair wish to do?
Well, I think Director McMahon, I've been thinking about that. I was going to look to see if there was anybody that had a really hot button place that they wanted to start, but I'm happy to actually move through this maybe one by one with some of the staff recommendations, um, maybe start there. But I do see I have Director Howard as well with a hand up, and I'm just wondering if there was a place that you wanted to start first, or if we, how's the will of the board working here today? Shall we just start and go through? But I also have our speakers list, so I'm going to look to Director Howard and then Director Hiltz to see what their hot buttons are, and then we'll go from there.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My questions and concerns relate primarily to Part 5.4 home-based business. So I'm in your hands as to whether I should hold that till later if we're going to move through these things sequentially. So I'm happy to hold my questions till later if that works for process.
Okay, I'll put up just a little pin in that. I'll see what Director Hiltz has, and then we will go from there.
Go ahead, Chair.
Okay.
No,
Nothing. No.
I do have a quick question on the recommendation. Just if we can just get a little clarification. It was a future board or a future board meeting? I'm just kind of, is staff recommending this term, or are they recommending next, like a new board would be next term? So is this the meeting or the board that? So was there, is there an omission of a word, or is that intentional? I guess is the question.
Okay. So just asking for a little clarity from staff then, I guess, whether or not they feel, my understanding is we could move this forward. We have the time to do this prior to the election if we're not making any changes in that would require another public hearing. But I'll look to Manager Jackson for some clarity around there.
Thank you. Through the chair, that's correct. This is positioned such that there is time that this board could consider adoption of the bylaw. So that is the intent of the recommendations. That being said, there's a number of changes that were taken into consideration following the public hearing that did not affect the use or density of the bylaw. So those were changes that can be considered without holding another public hearing. So as the report reads, there's a number of considerations in there that we've looked at to give the board options to consider should they choose to adopt the bylaw. Thank you.
Okay. Director McMahon? Because otherwise I'm ready to jump down to number 2 on page 16, which is one of the first suggestions of communication or changes in from, or recommendation, I should say, from staff. So Director McMahon, did you have something else pressing, or are you happy to move to that one?
I'm happy to move to that one if that's the will of the chair. I just wanted to state in general, I'm happy with staff's recommendations here. I attended the public consultations back in 2018, and at that time, I think the intent was to move this forward fairly quickly, but of course then COVID happened, among other things, and we've had, real resourcing challenges. So it's taken a while to get here. The argument that since it's taken so long, we should take still longer is I'm having some trouble with that one. There's a lot of important housekeeping updates that need to be done to this bylaw, and I like some of the responses here. So on the floor area, I think this is a much better. The total floor area of all allowable auxiliary, boy, that's hard, auxiliary buildings plus a maximum of 40% of the floor area of a dwelling, I think is really fits with what people were saying at the public hearing, and I think that's a lot more flexible and realistic in terms of how people use their space on their properties. So I am supportive.
Okay, and Director Howard, I know you wanted to speak to home-based business as well. Did you want to address this here too?
My comments actually relate to provisions of the bylaw that are not addressed by the recommendations for revisions by staff.
Okay.
I will express my general support for those revisions and my appreciation for staff demonstrating that they were attentive and listening during the public hearing, which I also attended. I think the feedback was very persuasive, it was pretty unanimous, and it was pretty clear. And I see a lot of that reflected in these revisions, and I'm appreciative of staff for bringing them forward and generally supportive of them. I have some questions that relate to elements of section 5.4.1 that are not addressed in the revisions. And I'm happy to hold those to later if you want to move us through the staff revisions.
I would, actually, Director Howard, I think while we're on 5.4.1, well, let's maybe speak to those as well right now.
Great. So this question is directed to staff, and it has to do with 5.4.1B, which relates to the requirement that home-based business be conducted entirely within an enclosed building, with one identified exception. At the public hearing, if I recall correctly, at least one or two people identified that they run home-based businesses, including equestrian training, that cannot occur entirely within an enclosed building. And there was concern that this wording as it currently stands would preclude currently operating businesses. I know as well that there's there's a petting farm off the highway, which I believe would also, on a strict reading of this section, fall afoul of the requirement to have your business occur only within an enclosed building. I'm also mindful that there is an existing requirement in G that a home-based business not produce a nuisance, including noise, which would appear to be aimed at preventing noise from outdoor business use. So I'm wondering if staff have turned their mind to whether B should have been revised to enable additional types of businesses to operate in part outdoors. And here I'm thinking particularly of businesses that require animals, like equestrian training. So thank you.
Okay. Over Manager Jackson.
Thank you for the question, and I'll start out. Senior Planner Sal may have some additional comments to add as well. Generally speaking, as was just discussing, the childcare one is not considered a home-based business, so it's in there, but there's that exception given, but it's actually a little bit different than a home-based business. If a petting zoo or farm or an equestrian type use was actually taking place in the agricultural zone, it would be permitted as an agricultural use. So again, not a home-based business in that case. Now, if somebody wanted to have a petting farm on their R1 zone property, for example, then it would be a home-based business and they'd have to do it inside of a barn. So it's challenging with these things to find regulations that sort of one size fits all, but yet still maintaining that residential character of neighborhoods where these businesses are primarily conducted. But that was the intent of this. So normally those are seen as agricultural type uses in those cases. Now, if there was some sort of exception where someone had a unique idea that involved animals that was in a contained way that made sense for the location, that's where these would be a condition of use and not the actual use, so they could come and apply for a development variance permit to have that considered. Hopefully that helps answer the question. Thank you.
Thank you. That's very helpful. I did have one other question that is quite specific, if I could be permitted to ask it.
Yes, please go ahead, Director Howard.
Thank you. And it was in relation to the requirement in sub E that, with respect to restrictions on outdoor storage of materials. I note that containers are included in there. Is that just a carry forward from an existing bylaw requirement? And has there been any thought or consideration given to whether, I mean, I'm aware that multiple properties currently contain containers, which are used for a variety of purposes. So I'm just wondering what the logic is behind the inclusion of containers there and whether any thought was given to whether that was actually still a prudently necessary element of this bylaw.
Staff?
Thank you for the question. Through the chair, just confirming here that yes, that was an existing regulation that was pulled forward. So it is, again, about sort of that residential character. Containers are one of those things where there's sort of there's pros and cons to them depending on how they're done. Oftentimes what we do see though is people just sort of picking up a used shipping container, for example, C-can as they're often dubbed, and plopping it on their property, and it often done without sort of care and attention to things like setbacks and riparian regulations and all these sorts of things that should be looked at. They're so easy to just sort of have dropped off from a truck as they come. And so they're one of those things that is a really challenging aspect, that people see the benefit of sort of reusing an old thing that they can get for a really good price. But on the other hand, they do have negative impacts potentially on the residential character of a neighborhood when they're sort of just plopped in their rather large sort of thing, typically sort of 10 by 40 in many cases. So that's, I believe, sort of the historic logic for having that in there. So I hope that helps answer that question. Thank you.
Okay. All right, so I'm going to, I see Director Seegers with your hand up as well, but so section number 2 of the staff report, specifically around home-based businesses and those changes that are being recommended by staff. Just everyone, if they have any other comments or questions there, and I'll go over to Director Seegers.
Thank you. I know most of the directors were at the public hearing. I think most of the objections that came forward from the community were with regards to the provisions in the new zoning bylaw with regards to home-based businesses and the agriculture. We did hear about the riparian setbacks, but in the report that staff have given, what they're also saying is another alternative is to keep home-based business and agriculture as they are in the current zoning bylaw. That would then allow staff to go out and actually do the consultation in the community, have the rest of it pass, but go back and do more consultation to revise these so that they actually meet what the community is looking for. So I just want to put that to the directors. That's an alternative that's there for you. So we don't have to actually craft it here. We know that more information has to come forward. And doing that, taking those out, reverting back to bylaw 25 at this point would not require another public hearing, would allow the rest of the bylaw to move forward and give the new board and the staff time to work with the community. So I just want to lay out, that's an option for you. It is in here, but it's kind of after all the other pieces. So turn it over to you to how you want to deal with that.
And it's bylaw 310, not 25.
Sorry, ours is 25. That's right, 310. Got it, thanks.
Lots of zoning bylaws that are getting rewritten right now on the coast. So, and that's a fair point. Thanks, Director Seegers, that there is the other option that we just continue with the 310 language. But there's some great recommendations from staff that still are able to be incorporated if we wish. Director McMahon?
Yes, this bylaw does in fact loosen the restrictions on residential agriculture, and it permits roadside stands, which we've had for years and years and are really important. They're part of our neighborhoods and part of the whole residential agriculture, local food thing. So I would be generally comfortable with moving this forward. I'm now on page 17. I don't know if that works for everybody. So I'm happy that we're removing the deliveries thing and vastly simplifying the question about employees. But I did have a question about off-street parking. And what constitutes a parking spot? Can I park 4 people on my front lawn?
Yeah. Senior planner, Sale.
Thank you, Chance. So parking space is defined in the bylaw as with specific dimensions on width and length, and it has to have an access to a road, so that constitute a off-street parking, and it has to be entirely contained within the private property. So, thanks.
So it can't be, for example, on Southwood Road, you can't just section off a section of Southwood Road on the eastbound lane, for example. It needs to be entirely within your property. Okay. I will say, I'm just going to zip back up to page 16, is I prefer the staff recommendation for the rewording for 5.4.1.c over bylaw 310 wording, because I think that really addresses the larger workshops that we have in the community. And also one of the comments that really sticks in my head from the public hearing is if you have an individual that has a large workshop yet is a minimalist in how they live, they're going to have a smaller home, or they don't have the needs for a larger space. So bylaw 310 is a little outdated in that way, in saying that you need to have a larger residential property than a home occupation space. So personally, I'm in favor of that, and I'd like to see that move forward. And I'm understanding from Director McMahon, you prefer that. I would look to the other area directors, Director Hiltz, Director Howard. Which language there do you prefer? Actually, we'll take it as a vote, maybe. Director Hiltz, first you.
I'm just going to say I'm in favor of, supportive of the staff recommendations, essentially all of them, as I think it does cover off and allows us to move forward. And for me, it's this balance between making a living either through food production or home-based businesses. So I see a good balance there. So that's where I was interested in the board moving it to the next available board meeting is kind of where I was going in terms of the timing of the recommendation. So generally, all supportive of all of them.
Okay.
Thanks.
Okay, Director Howard.
Same for me, supportive of the revisions as proposed by staff. I don't need to go through them one by one if the rest of the board is prepared to move them.
Okay. All right. And Director McMahon.
Yeah, I do have a question. What is the history of the ban on kennels in several of the electoral areas? Does anybody know? It's a curious provision in the original bylaw 310. It's not unique to the current bylaw.
Staff, do you want to tackle the history lesson?
Well, thank you for the question. I'm going to do my best. As we were just discussing here amongst the staff table, in some cases it may actually predate us being born. But certainly what we do know when it's a thing in many communities that we see is, they do come with some nuisance, yet they're also a need, just like childcare is in our communities. So where they go, and in some cases they are, quote unquote, the fur babies of the community. So where those are located is something that is really needing to be done through things like rezonings and possibly official community plan amendments, depending on exactly what land use designation we'd be talking about putting it in. So in those cases, there's still an opportunity for someone to make an application to SCRD to have consideration of a kennel. But what this bylaw or the previous bylaw do not allow is for people to just sort of buy a property and say, I'm going to start a kennel here. Meanwhile, the unsuspecting neighborhoods now have a bunch of additional traffic on their street and noise that they maybe didn't think that they were buying into when they chose to live there. Yet we do have many operating kennels in the community, some of which are legally non-conforming, which the Local Government Act has special conditions which allow those to continue to operate with the zoning, even though that the zoning doesn't actually recognize them as being a kennel site. The Local Government Act recognizes those pre-established uses. So with that said, there's still flexibility for people to come forward should they so choose to make the appropriate applications. Hopefully that helps answers the question. Thanks.
Okay. Director Lee, I see your hand up.
Thank you, Chair. I'm trying to figure out exactly about these here roosters. I'm looking at page 18.
Okay. All right. So let's move on down to livestock, page 18.
Whoops, I jumped ahead, did I?
No, that's fine. I think we were done with home-based businesses. So
Okay. I read through it and it says it looked like we were going to do something about making 1,500 square meters the same as a 3,500 square meters. Pretty big lots. And I thought perhaps roosters would be allowed in there, but if I'm reading this correct, that's not the case. I'd like to confirm that's right.
staff.
Thank you for the question. So that's generally correct. So what happened was bylaw 310 allowed for the keeping of poultry and rabbits. Bylaw 722 doesn't propose to take that away with the proposed amendments. There was some change because we were trying to include a smaller lot size category, and that's the lot size between 1,000 square meters and 1,500 square meters, to also give them the ability to do residential agriculture, recognizing the need in the community. But the original proposal did sort of blanket the same provisions then from 1,000 to 3,500. So what the revised version does is it keeps the 1,000 to 1,500 square meter new category with the restrictions that were initially proposed, because that's what all the early community consultation involved in terms of bringing it down to those smaller lots. So in those cases, they're not allowed to have roosters, and there are limitations on the number of poultry and rabbits that they can keep, and then 2 beehives as well. So in the lot sizes between 1,500 and 3,500 square meters, what we've done is we've brought in the keeping of bees, because that wasn't previously there. And then we've removed the restriction on the number of poultry and rabbits, as was before. And then we've also removed the prohibition on roosters in those categories, because it wasn't previously prohibited. So in this case, everything with the staff recommendations, everything that is proposed is a benefit to residential agriculture. Nothing's being taken away from what anybody previously had. So that was the intent of those revisions based on what we heard, but still moving forward with adding the good things that we wanted to add, including decreasing the lot size where residential agriculture is an opportunity. Hopefully that help answers it. Thank you.
Director McMahon.
Thank you. Great answer. So the problem only arises when people do their residential agriculture badly, creating a nuisance for the neighbors. But in that case, they can complain that there is a nuisance, that there are avenues for complaint. Could you just clarify that? Thank you.
That's correct. I'm not a bylaw expert in terms of every bylaw infraction that one can make. But if there is something that's being done that's not in keeping with our bylaws that we have in place at SCRD, someone can then make a complaint. So for example, if somebody decided to keep a rooster on a smaller lot where it's not permitted, then that's certainly an enforceable complaint. And similarly, if people are breaking the rules in other ways where it's not, there's some provisions in terms of how far certain uses must be from property lines. So those are all things that we can follow up on if there's something that's, quote unquote, being done perhaps not by the books. And we can look at that on a case-by-case basis. Thank you.
Okay. So I'm wondering, how big is a beehive? Like, is a beehive like one of the squares, or is it like the stack, like the full stack when we're talking about beehives? And then I also have another question about keeping of bees as a livestock. Is there a limit to keeping of bees as a non-livestock, like just as a just as you may have a cow or a pig as a pet, or you may have them as a livestock purpose? There's one thing I'm very conscious of, and it's bees as a necessity and pollinators as a necessity for our world, essentially, and being Buzz. that we're in a bit of a crisis with our pollinators globally. So I hate to limit any kind of use of bees. So those were my questions. I'm wondering if somebody could keep a small hive just as just to support the bees, or like as a non-livestock purpose, and just for clarity, how big is a beehive?
Thank you for the question. So the regulations were developed in terms of the best practices that we've seen out there, both through other local government scans, including other regional districts, as well as the Ministry of Agriculture. That being said, so a beehive doesn't necessarily have a size attached to it. Some of them, it could be the stacks. So that's sort of the intent, is that like this is one beehive, and there's sort of ways that that's generally done if someone's doing it. As per a previous question, they're sort of well versus bad. So that would be the best practices of doing so. That being said, there's no regulations on what people may be able to have on their property that may be, say, for example, what I would call a bee attractant versus sort of the actual keeping of bees, which is more of an agricultural use. So it's a true agricultural use versus, say, a horticulture use that's just sort of a incidental to the residential use that they're doing. So they may have wildflowers, for example, that naturally attract bees to their property, even though they may not. Maybe they're, for example, less than 1,000 square meters. That would still be an option that they could have. One thing I would add, though, too, is that when you look at the regulations that we do have, they're actually, or proposed, I should say, they're actually really covering a good majority of the lots within the regional district. Due to the VCH requirements for septic, most, new lots that are created, unless they're on a community sewer, would all be over a half an acre, so 2,000 square meters. And even historically, older lots that were done before the current regulations on septic for VCH, you see a lot of quarter acre type sizes that do exist. But unless they're on a community sewer in a smaller sort of subdivision area, really most of the lots in the regional district actually would probably be able to keep a beehive, because many of them are over that 1,000 square meters. So there's that as well. But even if you are on a smaller, sort of more urbanized size lot somewhere, whether it's historic or something new on a community sewer, you'd still be able to have what I would sort of call bee attractants as part of your overall horticulture, gardening type uses on your property. Hope that answers the question. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And honestly, I'm not expecting to, see pet bees, but I'm just saying that, like, the bee attractant, that I appreciate that, and also the clarity that on a lot of the lot sizes in the rural areas, it's going to be okay that they're there. So, Director McMahon.
Yes. At another time, when we're not in a meeting, I will happily regale you with the story of the epic bee lawsuit in West Vancouver that went on through the media for a very long time. I'm really happy with these regulations because they bring into conformity a lot of the existing uses in my area. I mean, I actually did go around one day and compare the folks who were selling eggs with the zoning that permitted poultry. And there's obviously a lot of people who are keeping poultry and bees and so forth on lots that are smaller than technically they're allowed to, but their neighbors are perfectly happy, there's no complaints, and everybody's getting along. So I would much rather have these people be legalized and their roadside stands. So I'm happy with this. Thank you.
Perfect. Okay. Anything else on the agricultural piece? I'm not seeing any. The next one I have is the proposed requirement for setting back buildings and structures at least 15 meters from the natural boundary of the ocean. And this is similar to what's already happening in Roberts Creek. And I'm just going to see if the directors want to follow the recommendation from staff to continue with that setback, or whether or not to revert back to bylaw 310 language. Director McMahon.
I am very happy with that recommendation for setback. And once again, if people have a particular problem on a piece of property, they can always apply for a variance. Thank you.
Personally, I feel that as well, especially in light of our climate challenges and ocean rise. I think this is a prudent choice and following direction not only of Roberts Creek, but also of our other municipalities. Director Hiltz or Director Howard, any further comment on that? No? Oh, Director Hiltz, go ahead.
Agreed. Move on.
Okay,
Thank
move on. All right. Okay, so next up, number 5, which is on the bottom of page 19, proposed exemption of wind turbines from height limits. Any comments on this or adopting the recommendation from staff, the proposed recommendation change? Directors, Director Hiltz, adopt the proposed recommendation. Okay. Director Howard, Director McBean nods your no objection. Okay, no objection. All right. And then the kennel question we had earlier that it predates birth of some of our some of the people around the table. So we're essentially we're keeping the changes that we're, or essentially we're not changing anything that we already have. That's correct. We're just updating our language around that. All right. Okay, so I'm going to pull us back up to page 14. I'm not seeing any other shaking hands or hands up or any, just hang on here. This is just trying to flip through my electronic pages here. Oh, Director Lee?
Yes, I was checking our calendars, and I think that we're trying to get this done before the end of our term. And so we only have 2 additional board meetings. One is today, and the next one is October 13th, which is 2 days before the final election day.
And I think we actually have one on the 27th of October as well, do we not?
Okay.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I just wondering if we should have some sort of a line in there
Well-
saying refer today.
Okay, I have GM Hall. I saw his hand up there, so I'm going to go to GM Hall. There he is.
Thank you, Chair. I may have jumped the gun. I was just going to add for clarity that this would flow to the next regular board meeting on October 13th if the recommendation proceeds as drafted. Thanks.
Okay. So I am going to look to the directors. We have a recommendation from staff on page 14 of our agenda. Director McMahon, do you wish to move that, or do you have a change, something different that you'd like to say?
I am happy to move the recommendation on page 14.
Okay. And just for clarity, because it does say a future board, is that the board meeting on October the 13th that you'd like to see it at?
Sure.
Okay. So Director McMahon is moving that the revised zoning bylaw 722 be forwarded to a future board meeting on October the 13th for 3rd reading and adoption. Do I have a seconder
Okay.
for that?
I'm just going to interrupt for a second. Tara just gave me some clarity here. If we want to do that, we would need to forward this recommendation today to this afternoon's board meeting.
Correct,
Right,
because
and
it comes
yes.
forward as a recommendation.
Yes.
The recommendations are adopted, and then we would have it would come forward as the board meeting where the reading actually happens would be after the recommendation is adopted.
That's right.
Because this is just a recommendation that goes to board.
That's right.
Okay. So Director McMahon, it's so that the revised zoning bylaw be forwarded to a future board meeting for 3rd reading and adoption. That's your recommendation? And then it would just naturally follow. So I think what I'm looking for from directors is if we're okay with that, it's going to be coming up at the October 27th board meeting for third reading and adoption. Is that correct? From staff? That's how it would flow?
Thanks for the question. Acknowledging the importance of this and wanting to ensure we get this right, if staff could just make a brief check with our corporate officer to ensure we're providing the best advice to you.
Okay.
Thanks. Thank you.
Sorry, can we do a 5-minute recess? We'd also like to have just a quick break.
Tell you what, why don't we, okay, so we have we're just going to go to staff. Why don't we actually take our 10-minute break now, and then we'll come back at 11:25 for, and we'll start with Director McMahon's motion. However, it's recommendation by staff, or the best wording from staff, so we have that clarity. So we're just going to recess until 11:25.
All right.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. Okay. See you in a few. And welcome back to the Sunshine Coast Regional District Committee of the Whole for September 22nd, 2022. And we are back with our famed corporate officer, Sherry Reed, to help us as we tiptoe through the question here. Okay, so I'm going to go to Director McMahon. We had your motion on the, we were just about to second your motion that, but we just needed some clarity on when we move this motion that the revised zoning bylaw 722 be forwarded to a future board meeting for third reading and adoption. When will the timing of that occur? Will it be pre-election or post-election? Will it be this current board or will it be the next board that actually does third reading and adoption? And what's the best way to handle that at this point?
Thank you for
any guidance?
Yes. Thank you for the question. So it's really up to the committee to decide when they want this bylaw to come back for third reading and adoption. The soonest it could come back would be the October 13th board meeting. So what would happen is the recommendation from this committee would be forwarded to that agenda, and the bylaw could also be placed on that agenda for third reading and adoption. So that would be the soonest.
Okay. And the other option that we could have as a board or as a committee is to recommend that this go forward to the next board for third reading and adoption.
Correct. Well, there's also a board meeting on October 27th, and then
okay,
you could move into November should you decide you need that time.
Okay. All right. So Director McMahon, seeing as you had been the one to start the motivation for this, I'm going to look to you to see how you want to direct this.
Okay, having had 10 minutes to think about this, first off, I think we should specify in our motion because, you know, for the record and everything else, just saying a future board meeting is too vague. Personally, I would be fine with sending this to the October 13th board meeting, but I would like to see if any of the other directors feel strongly in any other direction. Thank you.
Okay. I think maybe Director McMahon, if we could just word your motion to the October 13th and then let the vote be seconded, or let the motion be seconded or debated as is, and then go from there, because you never know how you feel until it's right in front of you. Okay, Director McMahon, so are you going to say October 13th board meeting?
That is exactly what I'm saying.
Excellent. And do I have a seconder for that from Run of the Rural Areas? I see a second from Director Hiltz. Okay, so rural directors, how do you, is there any other comment on this? Is everyone comfortable with October 13th board meeting for third reading and adoption? Director Hiltz.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. So we will be, when do the COW committee recommendations have to be received? So does it have to go to board today? That was one of the outstanding questions. Does it have to go to board today to be received as a recommendation, which goes to the October 13th? Thanks.
Through the chair, thank you for the question. No, it does not have to go direct to board today. It can be placed directly on the October 13th board agenda. And at that time, the board would review that recommendation and adopt it. Then we would proceed with reading the bylaw.
Terrific. I have Director Howard and then Director Lee.
Okay, sorry, I'm just going to interrupt 1 second. Just clarity on your last point. You said we're going to have the recommendation on the 13th meeting, which will be there for adoption. Would we also have the bylaw readings at the same meeting?
Yes, we would. So the board has an opportunity to not adopt that recommendation when it comes forward from committee. So that's the risk. If at that meeting the board decides for whatever reason they want to do further amendment, we would not read the bylaw at that meeting. We would pull it from the agenda and move it forward. But this recommendation does not need to go direct to board today in order for that bylaw to go forward on October 13th for readings.
Okay. So thank you for that clarity, and thank you, Director Seegers, for asking for that clarity. So Director Howard and then Director Lee.
I support the amendment to have it on the agenda for October 13th and do not see any point or advantage to punting it to after the election of the next board.
Thank you. Director Lee?
Thank you, Chair. I just was trying to get this firmly in my mind here. If we go to October 13th and we have third and adoption, it then becomes part of the minutes of that meeting. But we would have to vote the minutes as accurate before we are finished, which would then occur on the 27th. Just want to make sure everybody's good with that.
Corporate Officer?
Thank you. For clarification, when you adopt the bylaw in that meeting, it comes into force and effect right away. And so the minutes, as the meeting occurs, those minutes are the minutes directing staff action. So we don't have to wait until the 27th to approve those minutes.
Okay. All right. So we're all clear on our process. The motion is for the bylaw to be forwarded to the October 13th board for third reading and adoption. It's been moved. It's been seconded. It's been debated and clarified extensively. So I'm going to call the question. All those in favor? Rural areas. Excellent. And no opposed from the rural areas. So thank you. And thank you so much to staff. It was, I know it's been a very long process that predated our term, and it's been very inclusive. It's had a lot of comments. It was incredible to see so many residents involved in the bylaw public hearing, and it was a pleasure to chair. And I think that was the marathon one. We've had a few of those this term, but fantastic. I'm glad to see this one moving forward. So with that, we're going to go to Annex C of our package, which is our planning staff. Once again, it starts on page 353 of the package. And this is for the Liquor and Cannabis Regulation Branch, Liquor Primary New Outdoor Patio Application, 038526 Royal Canadian Legion, Branch 219, Roberts Creek. And I will pass this over to planning staff. Senior Planner Sale, are you taking this?
Yes, thank you, Chair. So this is a request from the BC Liquor and Cannabis Regulation Branch, LCRB, to review endorsement of an outdoor patio liquor license for the Royal Canadian Legion Branch 129, located at 3064 Lowell Road in Roberts Creek. So the proposal complies with the zoning bylaw and OCB policies of the SCRD. However, public input from the neighbors has revealed that concerns with noise and operation issues of the patio. So in order for this application to move forward to LCRB, staff recommend a set of conditions on noise control and operational management to be incorporated into a covenant. So this would enable the Legion to continue to serve the community while at the same time to mitigate negative impacts on the neighborhood. Thank you.
Terrific. Thank you very much, Mr. Sale. Was there anybody from the Roberts Creek Legion that wanted to speak to this at all in the gallery, or? Because I know that's one thing that we had asked at agenda review, is just to put the invitation out to them. So I just wanted to check if anyone was there to speak to this. GM Hall?
Thank you for the question, Chair. Staff don't see any representatives here. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Okay, so with that, I'm going to put it over to directors. If you have any questions or comments, I have Director McMahon.
Yes, I am having some difficulty with this one. I do go to jazz nights at the Little Legion, and many of us are fond of it as an entertainment venue. And I like the idea of outdoor patios, particularly given, I think, continuing concern about ventilation. in public spaces these days, but I have to take very seriously the concerns of the neighbors. It's, as far as I know, none of the noise bylaws on the Sunshine Coast specify decibel levels. I'm not sure that we have any experience with monitoring decibel levels. And the neighbors seem skeptical that the Legion would adhere to the terms of the covenant. So I'm very much on the fence about this and anxious to hear from Area D.
Okay. Well, as perchance would have it, I have Area D Director Tim Howard up next, or alternate director, Director Howard. Over to you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yes, the Roberts Creek Legion is a valued part of our community, and I personally have enjoyed the music there on many occasions and hope to continue doing so. I can understand the concerns of the neighbors with respect to the provision or the normalization of outdoor music. However, as I read the proposed restrictions, which I wasn't aware could be registered as a covenant on title, but I'll leave that aside, they are quite well tailored to avoid excess noise from music, and therefore seem to be aimed at striking the right balance between enabling the Legion to offer a service that will hopefully allow it to continue to operate and continue to provide what it does to our community, which is an extremely valuable role as a place to gather, while also trying to respect the needs and interests of neighbors. I have a question for staff, which is, has the Legion, did you inquire of the Legion whether they have the capacity to meet requirement 3, which is to have dedicated personnel to monitor non-amplified sound? Has there been discussion with the Legion? Are they aware of this? Have they provided any assurance that they have the capacity to uphold point 3 of the proposed covenant?
Over to staff.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Chair, for the question. Yes, staff did have consulted with the Legion, and the proposed conditions are agreeable to them, except that they have not provided any details on how they actually will implement those conditions, but they are agreeable with the Legion.
Thank you, Senior Planner. Director Howard, do you have a follow-up on that?
Yes, I do, and I perhaps staff could help us understand. As I understand it, these conditions are proposed to be enforceable by way of registration of a covenant, but presumably the Liquor and Cannabis Regulation Branch has neither the power nor the responsibility to register the covenant. Which party registers the covenant? How does this occur? Who's the covenantor? Who's the covenantee? Who bears the cost of the process? How does this actually get implemented in a manner that makes it enforceable and able, to have follow through?
Thank you, Chair. So the staff recommendation is for the Legion and the SCRD to enter into such a covenant before the SCRD forward the recommendation to LCRB to allow the patio license application to move forward. So presumably the cost will be bear by the Legion for drafting and registering the covenant.
A little bit more, Director Howard?
So, thank you. So as I understand it, what staff are saying is that the acceptance of the application, or the SCRD's indication of acceptance of the application, would be predicated on the SCRD first successfully registering a covenant on the property that contains these three conditions.
Yes, that's correct.
And then it would be the role of the SCRD as the covenantee to then enforce and uphold the covenant. So complaints would come to the SCRD, and it would be in the SCRD's capacity as holder of the covenant to enforce it.
Yes, that was the recommendation.
Is this a role that the SCRD wants to take on?
Manager Jackson, did you have a comment on that?
Thank you for the question. So I know there is precedence with Persephone where we have taken on a similar role. We certainly hope that the businesses, be it Persephone or the Legion, that when they do enter into these covenants, that they're fully aware of them and are respectful of them. And the hope is that there isn't a need for enforcement. But certainly if there was a community need that transpired where SCRD needed to step in, it's something that we would look to address at that time. That's the nature of having a covenant on title, is there is legal consequences if you don't follow it. So they would be bound by that covenant. Now it's certainly something that we hope doesn't happen, but there is the ability to actually seek enforcement if a person party to that covenant is not upholding their end of it. Thank you.
And so that enforcement would not be through, I mean, it could be through the noise bylaw. If you could make out a breach of the noise bylaw, that's an enforcement tool that is always available. But if the enforcement was via the covenant, would that require the SCRD to bring a BC Supreme Court application for enforcement of the covenant? Like, what are the enforcement? I mean, I know you can call them, you can engage in, obviously you'd go through all the regular steps of engagement, collaborative discussion, trying to resolve things, bringing it to their attention, all that. Let's assume that nonetheless some complaints continue to arise. What are the actual concrete enforcement steps that the SCRD would be able to take with a covenant registered on title?
Thank you for the question. So it would certainly start with, as you mentioned, sort of conversation, trying to help people understand, the need for the covenant. Going to court over it is certainly a last sort of worst case scenario that we would have to explore. Before that, there's other options like demand letters that we would look at issuing, which may or may involve legal counsel if it had gone beyond staff's capability. To date, we haven't had that on these type of covenants, but certainly that is an enforcement option that's there if we had to go down that route. Our bylaw enforcement team and planning staff would be the ones that would look to try and work it out, though, with the owner of the Legion, the people who the covenants are party to it with us. So in event that all things fail, you're correct, there are those options that we could pursue various degrees of escalating legal action. But the hope is that it's not necessary. It's on title, similar to like a memorandum of understanding, just with more teeth because there is follow through. But the idea is that both parties are agreeing to the covenant with understanding of the importance of the needs to uphold those aspects. Thank you.
GM Hall.
Thank you. The other thing to say about covenants that are tied to the holding of, for example, liquor license, is that coordinated enforcement with the regulatory agency that is responsible for the issuance of the license is probably a far bigger lever than our bylaw enforcement efforts. And so the threat of, it's entirely the license holder's thing to lose if they aren't fulfilling the conditions associated with their license. And so I was racking my brains for other instances where we have regulatory covenants registered to us, and the only examples I can really think of are ones where there's a financial benefit to the covenantee. Thanks.
Thank you for that comment, because that's what's on my mind is, I'm just trying to think this through. I'll be frank, my concern is the SCRD incrementally taking on additional roles and responsibilities that incur administrative costs, potentially incur future unanticipated costs and roles down the road, when against the backdrop of having a noise bylaw, which exists and is intended to regulate this type of thing. So I'm also mindful that this covenant will run with the property, and it'll be could be in place in perpetuity, and it's quite particular and quite specific. So, should this recommendation include that the SCRD request that any license issued include as a condition that the Legion maintain compliance with the covenant? Then that gives you that additional connection that you were just mentioning, General Manager Hall, back to the licensing body. They're linked explicitly.
Okay. Staff, comment on that? They're conferring right now. Manager Jackson?
Yes, thank you for the question. It's a good one. So it's certainly something that we could look at requesting. We can't guarantee the success that the Liquor and Cannabis Regulation Branch will accept that. So we are dealing with another agency in this case that would have to also accept those terms, but certainly something we could look at adding to the recommendations that be requested as part of the registration of the covenant and the issuance of the license.
I think it would be helpful not only to ensure that the ultimate hammer that will affect behavior is available, but as well to address the neighbors' interests so that they can be assured that the request has been made such that the issuance of the license is dependent, if you will, on good behavior, and that there's a built-in enforceability mechanism there.
Okay. Any further comment from staff on that? Or I'll move through the speakers list while we consider that. Director McMahon?
Yes, of course, the previous case of this was Persephone. And one of the things about that was that Persephone came here as a delegation to talk about why they needed the covenant and how they intended to follow through. And I'm a little perturbed that we're not seeing anybody from the Legion here to speak to this, because obviously if the neighbors are that concerned, and that many of the neighbors are that concerned, I would want to have some assurance that the Legion has the capacity and the intention to follow through. Nothing against the Legion, but I know that they're really struggling for volunteers. So I'm a little reluctant to move this forward right now. Is there a timeline on this? Is there a window by which we have to respond to this referral?
Thank you. I can answer that question. Yeah, there is no particular time limit. What they are intending to do is to replace the temporary license, which will expire in March of 2023.
Okay. So that answers Director McMahon's timeline question. Over to Director Hiltz.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, on the idea of enforceability of the covenant and the Legion to act in good faith. So, this is the premise of law, is you If you're going to enter an agreement, you act in good faith. So to have an extra good faith thing in the covenant that the province will restrict their license of someone not acting in good faith, I think this is kind of that separation between our neighborhood of how we look after ourselves in the province. So I don't know if there would be much to gain from saying, we really, really want you to act in good faith, opposed to just act in good faith because the law tells you to act in good faith. And you know, protecting against bad actors is just pretty difficult. And I think the Legion is a good actor, I think, and wants to perform. And for me, the balance that is struck between the neighbors that now have a line drawn, they can't say it's 80 decibels here, it's 70 decibels. So there's grounds to discuss with. So there's a line about the discussion. And it won't necessarily affect the noise of the Legion in general. It's just for the patio noise. So how they're going to deal with the comments from the people, the neighbors, are about the Legion opening windows and things and not just the patio. So it's not going to address all of their issues about noise. So there are two different mechanisms. So this is restricted to the patio. So that's where I'm okay with, okay, this is just the patio. The whole noise of the Legion, different lane, I'm going to say, different file. So that's kind of where I'm falling down. Is it looks reasonable? Is it enforceable? Well, we need people to behave, and if you can't, you know, there's just some people who don't. So, but I think the Legion will try, because of their long establishment in the neighborhood. I think so. I think it's an extra stick in the toolbox, I guess, or an extra tool in the toolbox. I'm not going to call it a stick. It's an extra tool. So I'm happy with it. And today or next week, I don't think there's much to gain from adding extra levels of behavioral control or something like this. Thanks.
Director Howard.
Boy, I'm a busy boy this meeting.
You really are.
Yeah,
No.
and I do in part also bring my lawyer's eyes to this. And one of the key principles of a restrictive covenant is it has to be unambiguous and clear in its intention so that it can be enforced. And covenants have been declared invalid or unenforceable due to ambiguity. Because it's a restriction on use of property, it goes against the now outdated presumption that you have an entitlement to use your property as you see fit. So I'm worried about 3. Where's that point of measurement of 70 decibels going to occur? Presumably at the property line, because that's the point at which you're worried, right? But without specification of the point of measurement, I'm worried that this is unenforceable. And I think if we're going to do this, I thought Director McMahon's point was very well taken, that I would have hoped to have seen a rep from the Legion present to speak to this, because the Legion is a source of noise. Period. End of story. I've been there. I've been part of that noise. I've left the Legion at 1 a.m. I'm well aware of what it can sound like. It is a source of noise, and the neighbors have to put up with it. And I think I would have expected the Legion, hopefully, to be here to speak to this. I think point 3 needs to be revisited to create greater clarity so that it can be enforceable. And I also, notwithstanding your comments, I do think linking it back as that there be a request that compliance with the covenant conditions be made a condition of the permit. I think that's helpful. So given all that, I don't actually, I mean, I think it should lie to me to move this, as I'm Area D and this is Area D, and if I can't get behind it, then we probably shouldn't be voting on it today. And I feel, given all that, I would be more comfortable deferring this to another meeting. And staff, I don't know how that sits with you, but if you're comfortable taking away the suggestions that I've given as to ways to potentially improve it and tighten it up, and the Legion can be given the gentle nudge that attendance might be prudent, this could be considered again.
Okay. I will say an invitation was extended. I'll go to staff. If we were to refer this to another meeting, when would it come back? Or can we just refer to a future committee of the whole, because it's going to end up coming back after the election at this point? GM Hall?
Thank you for the question, Chair. Then the next natural opportunity would be the November Electoral Area Services Committee, which staff would think is adequate time to complete the work that's been described, though not yet motioned. Thanks.
Oh, yes. Thank you for that, GM Hall. It's just been suggested, not motivated. Director McMahon.
I'm happy with deferring this, particularly as they're not going to need the patio in November, December, January.
Director Seegers.
Thank you. Is there a request by, what is it, LCRB for a certain time frame for us to respond? Okay, thank you.
Okay, so what I'm going to look for then is I'm looking for a motion to refer this to the Electoral Area Services Committee in November with the request from the Legion to appear, and with Director Howard's comments around clarifying the covenant so it's more enforceable. Is that sufficient wording for staff to follow up on, or do you need something a little bit more explicit than that? GM Hall?
Thank you, Chair. I think that description of those two items is adequate. If there's also a desire from the committee to, the simple way to put it would be tie issuance of the permit, or tie the permit to the covenant, tie LCRB's permit to the covenant. That might be a third area of work to direct staff. Thanks.
Okay. All right. Director Lee, I see your hand up.
Thank you, Chair. I'm a little concerned about cost here for what appears to be a relatively simple thing. Are we going to end up employing lawyers to go over the fine print and the periods and all that stuff before we go forward, or is this something that staff feel comfortable doing on their own?
Question over to staff.
Thank you for the question. I'll say both. We'd follow our normal practices for quality work, and staff are not concerned about time or cost. Thanks.
Okay, Director Seegers.
Thank you. I think as part of this, we are responding to LCRB indicating that this covenant is registered on title. How do they deal with it? I think that's part of what we're looking for. How do they deal with it if there's a contravention of that covenant?
Okay, so we have the two suggestions plus the third one from GM Hall about tying the covenant to the issuance with LCRB. It's alphabet soup today. Is everyone clear on what we're doing here about Director Howard? Would you like to motivate that motion?
Sure, if someone with more procedural experience at this board can tell me how to do it.
So,
I move the recommendation as clarified.
Yes. Is that clear enough for staff? The 3 points that we're looking at is referring this to the November Electoral Area Services Committee, looking around clarifying the covenant, and looking, or asking the Legion to appear to address this covenant, as well as tying the covenant with LCRB. Sorry, I've missed the wording there. Tying the covenant with the LRCB application or enforcement. Is that clear enough, or is that still a bit too ambiguous for staff?
Director Pratt, would you like Tara to read it? I think she's got that written
Oh,
down.
that would be so much better. Tara's so much better at the words than I am.
Oh, sorry.
Thank you, Chair. And that the topic of the LCRB liquor primary new outdoor patio application be referred to the November 2022 Electoral Area Committee meeting to provide clarity on the enforceability of the noise levels and the applicability of tying the issuance of the permit to the covenant, and further that an invitation be extended to the Legion to attend the committee meeting to provide further information and address the covenant.
Okay,
I'll move
Director
that.
Howard. Okay. And do I have a seconder, please? I see a seconder. Okay. And I'm going to ask all those in favor. Okay. Those opposed. Motion carries. Okay. We're going to keep on moving through. We have a lot of, I'm just going to bring to everybody's attention, we have a lot of things to get through here in the next couple hours. And, or no, we want to get through the next few items fairly efficiently just to make sure that we are ready for board this afternoon. So, we are going to move on to Annex D, which is the budget project status report for September 2022. And we have staff in the room, online, available to answer any questions. So I'd like to move through this fairly quickly. I'm doing this all electronically off of the agenda package. So we have page 367. I'm first going to look to staff to see if there's any introduction. I'm assuming not. This has become pretty regular for us. But if the CAO would like to make any comment, he's more than welcome to pipe up. But otherwise, I'm just going to start us off on page 368 of the package, which is line numbers 1 through 9. If there's any questions on any of that from directors. Seeing none, I'm going to move to page 369, line items number 10 through 17. Okay. 70, line items 18 through 23. Great. Page 371, line numbers 24 through 30. Page 372, line items 31 through 36. Page 373, line items 37 through 42. Page 374, line items 43 through 50. Page 375, line items 51 through 66. Director Lee. Which line item?
Line 51.
Okay.
It would appear that it's already past due, so I'm wondering if there is a new date. It was suggested it should be completed prior to end of Q3. That's the pressure washer replacement.
Yep, the pressure washer replacement for public transit maintenance facility. GM Gagnon?
Yes, I believe that procurement is underway. So it's not entirely complete, which is why it's not marked off as complete, but it's well underway.
Okay.
can I continue? I have some more on this block.
Oh, I'll allow Director Lee.
Okay,
Go ahead.
thank you. Line 54, it's talking about the hydro to the landfill, and there's no date projected. I was just wondering if there's any date that we could put on that, or?
I am going to, we've got Mia Edbrook, who's acting GM for Infrastructure Services right now. Mia, do you have an update? Line 54 under the Regional Solid Waste Power Supply Repair, Seashelt landfill, including interim operating costs.
I don't have an update, but I will find some information from our superintendent and I can follow up.
Okay. Director Lee?
I'm not sure where we are, but I have another question on line 56.
Yep, go ahead.
Line 56 is the new procedures for staff and the organics outreach and education. Is that ready to go? Is that going to happen pretty soon, or just curious? Like, is it next week, or how are we doing?
Thank you for the question. If I'm not, I'll have to check the agenda. I thought there was an item today on this topic, and I assume it included a timeline, but I also don't have information on hand about that.
Is it at board?
Sorry, real quick, if I can cut in. It is on this afternoon's board agenda.
Perfect.
Thank you.
Good.
Great.
And
go ahead, Director.
Last one on this block, I think it's in this block, is line 57. And I was hoping that the Share Shack would be open prior to all of the other work, as the Share Shack is there. We just need to open the door. I was wondering if there's any, has the plans been changed to do that, or are we looking at maybe not even next year?
Thank you for the question. I have not heard any word about the Share Shack opening early, but I will ask staff and we'll also follow up.
Thank you. That's it for me.
Oh. Okay, great. Thank you, Director Lee. I'm going to move on to page 376, which is line item number 67 through 81. 67 through 81. Director Lee, you have your hand up. Is there an item on this block, or?
Well, I actually forgot to put it down, but yes, indeed. The line 66, we talk about BioCover, and the date is Q2 2022. I was just wondering, is there a new date when we anticipate that to occur?
Okay. Thank you for the question. Let me look more closely. So that is for the RFP. Yes, there is a new date. That RFP has been taken on by Manager Shoji, and the work is underway, and we'll have to update this item in the BPSR, and I don't think it's posted yet, so it'll be Q4 2022.
Thank you. That's good news.
Great. Okay, anything else from lines 67 through 81? Okay, I'm going to move on to page 377 of the agenda, which is lines 82 through 99, and I see Director Lee.
Sorry, I lost track of where we were. Line 77 talks about the knocking down a tank known as the Dogwood Reservoir, and there's no date on that. I was wondering if there was any projection when that work might occur. It's been hanging around quite a while.
Mia, we got a lot of questions for you. Okay, go ahead.
Thought about bringing Shane with me. Thank you for the question. I don't know if this work has been scheduled. We have a lot of work underway right now, so capacity is certainly an issue. And for the next BPSR, I'll ensure that timeline is included.
Great.
Thank you.
I'm going to move to Director Hiltz.
Thanks, Chair. I'm on line 90. Just let me push my buttons.
Okay. So page 377, line 90.
Line 90, yeah, the Chapman Edwards Lakes Communication System. Just wondering if that's live and has it assisted in managing the water situation now, better communications, video, this type of thing, and any feedback on the improvements and operational changes? Thanks.
Thank you for the question. You're going to get a long email after this. And I've arranged my day incorrectly because I am meeting with other infrastructure managers to do project updates this afternoon. So I will follow up.
Great. Oops, I am just lost everything there. Okay, so we were on page 377. Anything else from page 377, which is lines 82 through 99? I'm not seeing any hands up, so I'm going to move to page 378, which is line items 100 through 117. Director Lee?
I was a little concerned when I read line 101 because it talks about Church Road as Q2 23 at the earliest. Is that an accurate statement? If it is, it concerns me quite a bit because we're into the summer drought. Not a good thing.
Thank you for the question. My understanding is there are some key parts that have been caused by supply chain delays. So that is preventing this project from coming online. As I think I'm going to assume that deadline, that is, they're trying to manage expectations given the revised schedule. And I agree with you that the desire, as you heard in the earlier committee of the whole meeting earlier in September, is to start getting Church Road online earlier than when we get into extensive periods of drought. So into higher water conservation regulations. So before stages 3 and 4.
Okay. I'm going to go to Director Hiltz.
Thanks, Chair. Line 105, Eastbourne groundwater development. It mentions First Nations permitting reviews. Just was there any, I don't know what that is, and if there's any details on that. Thanks.
I'm going to assume that we need approval and that we haven't heard a response yet. Thank you for the question.
Okay, Director Seegers.
Thank you. I lost all my notes from this whole thing, so I've been madly going through here. Line number, maybe we're not here yet. I'm at line 105. Am I on the right page?
Go ahead.
Okay.
Line 105, we're good.
Trying to make
You're in the right spot.
All right, line 105. Test well drilling, this is for the Eastbourne groundwater development delayed due to First Nations permitting reviews. And this is the Squamish Nation, I believe, that we're looking at with this. Do we have any more details on that?
So Eastbourne may not only be the Squamish Nation, but I'm not sure. There's more in terms of governance. It may go beyond that. So I'm not sure who they've reached out to and the timeline.
Okay, the reason I'm looking at that, there's a conversation that we're having provincially, and I'm wondering if there's further information on this that should come to the board to be included in the advocacy work that we're doing as well. Thanks.
Okay. Anything else up to line 117? Okay, I'm going to move on to page 379 of the agenda, or line 118 through 129. Page 380, line 130 through line 146. Page 381, lines 147 through 170. Page 382, lines 171 through 173. Okay, so that's the end of where are you going to take us?
Back.
Okay, which line number?
Hang on. Lines 166, 167. Yeah, 166 and 167. This is with regard to Fire Smart Economic Recovery Fund, and it says lack of capacity with SIGD has led to likely need to cancel the project. So staff will be following up with a board report to confirm direction. So the one is around their longhouse and the wastewater plant. So that's a concern, given that we've got, you know, high potential for fire here on the Sunshine Coast. I don't know if they'd want their longhouse demolished. So is there additional work that we as a board can reach out? Is there anything that we can do to assist to ensure that this work actually gets done? And that would be probably for staff.
I'm going to look to Manager Trite.
Yes, thank you for the question. So the grant application for that portion of it was to be administered through the SIGD, and they didn't have the capacity to organize the work to be done, and that's why the grant is like that portion of it anyway is likely going to be canceled.
Okay, GM Hall.
Thanks, Chair. I'd just add, this is, that update to this document came together just before its preparation, and staff haven't had an opportunity to kind of reset to see if there's a different way of approaching this that the grantor can get behind to get the work done. I think staff certainly share an appreciation for the importance of the work, and so we're going into the next steps here with a solution focus. We'll see what we can come up with. If the work is going to change, we may need to bring something forward for your consideration as signatories to the grant. But we'll see what we can do. Thanks.
Thank you. As you're looking at that, I'm just saying, you know, use us as a board to do some connections with maybe at the elected level to see if we can push that work forward. Okay, thanks.
Okay, so we've reached the end of the in progress. Are there any questions on any of the completed, canceled, or deferred project items? So that's to the end of page 385. Thank you very much, staff. Thank you for everyone for being there. And, oh, sorry, Director McMahon. There we go.
Well, I just do have a general question. The CAO is not here at the moment, but we have 23% of projects finished, and we're in September. How are we doing?
There's the CAO masquerading as the CFO.
Yeah, sorry, I was sitting beside Tina. Director McMahon, if you don't mind, could you repeat the question? I missed part of it while I was shuffling chairs here.
Right. So we're at September, and we have 23% of projects finished. We have a unprecedented, dare I say, number of projects in the hopper. How are we doing?
I guess, how are we doing? I guess a little more context around the how are we doing? How are we doing overall? How are we doing in editing ourselves to ensure that we don't flood the system with even more projects next year? It depends on which of the how are we doings you might mean. I would say how are we doing overall is we're making decent progress on a whole bunch of really important projects. We are still struggling with the overall number of projects we currently have on that list that are either not started yet or less than 25% complete. Some of those dating back a few years when you look at the start dates. We are also struggling organizationally with all the things that we know are time sensitive, super important, some things that are going to be forwarded in 2023 that fall under the category of mandatory. We have to do them. And non-discretionary, we don't even really have much control over how we do them or when we do them. And there's a number of those being forwarded for next year. So I guess the answer to your question is we're getting by, but we have too much volume, not enough capacity, and we need to do a better job of self-editing. Hopefully that wasn't too blunt.
We appreciate blunt. Clarity is kind. So with that, thank you very much. And we're going to move on to Annex E, which is the grants status update. Hey, there's our CFO. Hi, Tina. Would you like to provide an introduction or just the report as presented?
Yeah, we can just take any questions if you have any, and of course, recognizing that there's a couple of reports today with additional grants that we're submitting and some more to come. So that is one of the things sometimes we're always trying to take advantage of as many opportunities as we can. Sometimes we might be a little delayed, but yes, any questions, staff are welcome to answer any that you might have. Thank you.
Okay. Directors, any questions on the grant status update report? I have Director Seegers.
Thank you. I'm looking at the one on page 387, table at the top, last one. So this is the grant for $6 million for the universal water metering phase 3. Do we have any idea what kind of timelines we're looking at for that one? Like just to know whether or not we are in the running or not?
Thank you for the question. The RFP has been prepared. I know that there's work and revisions being done on it. I believe the schedule was to have it awarded by the end of the year. It could be January 2023. If we can find a vendor and have them start right away, the installations would start in early 2023. It's anticipated that the timeline will be approximately 18 months, depending on the number of crews that can work all at once. If there's more crews, the work can be done more quickly. It's about 2 people per house or per property. And then I'll also mention, because this I know, in parallel, we're starting to prepare a communications plan.
And CFO?
Yeah, so as far as the grant award, my understanding was that we would be notified before the end of the year.
Thank you.
Director Lee?
Yes, I have a couple of questions, but the first one is I notice we have $120,000 for a regional heat response plan, and I know that we are struggling to get all our projects done. Well, I do like using grant money, but it does use up human resources. With our experience over the last 2 years, I'm not sure we need any more than what we've already got. I was just wondering if there was any comments on that.
PM Hall, so I'll go over to you.
Thanks for the question, Director, and through the chair. There are quite a large number of emergency-related grant applications that are on this list, and in fact there's another one later on this agenda. And I would just say that I guess the 2 comments in reply to the question are this was part of the case for the initiative to increase our emergency coordination capacity, and we're very glad to have Nancy Hughes with us as a full 1.0 emergency management coordinator. And secondly, I think it's a reflection of of the need, and it ties to the strategic plan as well. So hence the focus and the allocation of human resources to make these things possible. And thankfully, there are lots of resources available to us through UBCM and others. Thanks.
Okay, and Director Lee, you said you had another question too?
Yeah, thanks for that answer. It did answer my questions. I was thinking of it in an entirely different light. This one is a curiosity one, and it's page 389, and it talks about the value of natural and hybrid infrastructure, and I don't have any idea what that is.
Well, I can start with just saying that would be things like streams and parks and all sorts of types of things that don't make us have to construct man-made infrastructure.
But curiosity says that it's to increase the use and uptake of natural and hybrid infrastructure and build community awareness. I was trying to figure out what we would be doing on something on that. I really struggled. Is it say, hey, we've got dams and it's got the water and that's really good and we're going to tell you about it? Or what would a project look like under that?
Just riffing an example, as we look at heat response plans, there's certainly a lot of data about the preservation of tree canopy as an alternative to adding building insulation, adding air conditioning, operating cooling centers. So something we would consider as part of working on a project like that. Thanks.
That's an excellent riff. Good example. So any other questions on the grant application and status? Okay, we will move on to Annex F, which is Raphael Shea, Manager of Sustainable Development, UBCM Disaster Risk Reduction Climate Adaptation Grant Application. This is one of those emergency ones, I would assume. So, Raph, Mr. Shea, over to you.
Thank you, Chair. There's an opportunity to apply for some grant funding coming up shortly. And our staff believe that it was an opportune moment to create more defensible baseline of knowledge as we prepare for diving deeper into the Community Climate Action Plan with the community, as well as prepare for some more in-depth OCP discussions. And there's also some potential benefits on increased service levels as we talk about development and moving forward. So the one thing I'd like to add as well, as in addition to what's in the report, is that based on further work with partners, we would like to request one additional clause be added, requesting resolutions of support from District of Sechelt, Islands Trust, and perhaps Sechelt and Squamish Nations as well. Thank you. I'm happy to take any questions.
Okay, I have Director Toth and then Director Seegers.
Thank you, Chair. I'm happy to move the recommendations on page 391 with the addition of the one from Manager Shea.
Okay. So I have that as a move. I do have a speakers list, but I'm going to ask if there's a seconder for that before we move through this. I do see a seconder. I'll go to Director Seegers. Oh, actually, I'm going to jump over to GM Hall first because I see his hand up.
Thank you, Chair. Just to add to Manager Shea's list, Town of Gibsons as well, please. We've been working really hard and together with our partners on the coast on this one, and so the final cast of characters to be confirmed, but thankfully lots of interest, and an inclusive recommendation will ensure we don't have to come back to you for 2 extra words. Thanks.
Okay. So just in case there are some other amendments that come up through the discussion, I'm just going to add, we'll go for an amendment after we've gone through a little bit of the speakers list, but I've got a note here to add Town of Gibson's in before we pass this motion. So I'll go to Director Seegers, then Director McMahon.
Thank you. I'm just looking for some clarification on this. In the background on page 391, it indicates the grant funding to a maximum amount of $150,000 per applicant is available. So what are we applying for? Are we applying for $150,000? Will it depend on how many of the other applicants come forward? If it becomes SIGD, District of Sechelt, SCRD, does that mean we get $450,000 we'd apply for? Like, just some clarity around how this would play out. Thanks.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for the question. I'm happy to clarify that the grant program is maxed at 150,000 per applicant, and there's a lot of points and attention given to regional collaborations. So if we are to apply with some of our member munis or other partners, then that amount would go up, and we would need more because we would be covering a broader geographical scope, but there would be some efficiencies gained in terms of consistency to the baseline knowledge that we are building. So I don't have an exact amount of what we're applying for yet. I'm still talking with some players in the sector to estimate what the costs would be. But it would be within that capped amount.
Okay. Thank you for that. Director McMahon, then Director Hills.
Yes, good. We definitely need this. Sechelt particularly needs it, but Ocean Beach Esplanade could use it too. And some of this data, hopefully we could use when we are advocating with MOTI, because there is no plan around managed retreat from our infrastructure, and it's very worrying. So thank you.
Okay, Director Hills.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, work that needs to be done. Just wondering, we just went through the BPSR of the staff capacity and the projects, and just wondering how it fits into the work plan, and would the work mostly be, it looks like it's mostly consulting work that would be doing the most of the work, and staff managing the grant is, so just some details on the management of the project and where it would fit in with the work plan, I guess. And would things be dropping to allow this to happen, I guess, is part of that question. Thanks.
Staff, go ahead.
Thank you for the question. Right now, it would be incorporated into the work plan of Sustainable Development Division in partnership with some other divisions, and there's been some discussions at a staff-to-staff level around setting up some co-management approaches with the other interested applicants, should there be any. But what we expect that this work would be primarily led by the consultants and their expertise.
Director Seegers.
Thank you. Recently, Manager Shea came to the District of Sechelt and did a presentation, same report that was presented at the regional district here. And one of the things I recall from that is that the forecast is that in 8 years, the downtown area of the District of Sechelt will be underwater. Now, we're hoping it doesn't come to that, but we need this work done now. So if there's something else that we need to take off down the road, I think we need to get this done. So thank you for bringing that forward.
Okay. So before we fully move the motion, oh, sorry, Director Lee, do you have another question?
Yes, sorry to be so late. It's just in the conference that we recently attended, I had a workshop, and well, it wasn't a workshop, it was a presentation and the Meteorological Service of Canada is doing a project to try and predict flooding events the day of or slightly ahead of when they occur, and it seems like this project would be very similar to what the data this project's collecting would seem to be of quite good value to them. I was wondering if Manager Shea had been contacted with them or had any discussions with them?
Manager Shea?
Thank you for the question. There's a lot happening at the federal, provincial, and various agencies, and we're in communication with the province in terms of what they're up to, because we would like to reduce the duplication of effort and maximize the transfer of knowledge. As a condition of this specific grant, transferring the knowledge to the provincial data sets is a requirement. And we are trying to get in touch with the federal agencies in question to better understand the specific forecasting and service that's being discussed here. But yeah, we believe that what we would do here would probably help inform that on a more responsive basis moving forward, because that seems to be what they're trying to do there. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. My concern is if we can get a grant to do it instead of paying for ourselves, it's a really good deal. So thanks a lot.
Excellent. Okay, so I'm going to ask for an amendment to the motion to include the town of Gibsons. Is there anyone else that should we be included as well? Manager Shea or GM Hall, along with the other one that Manager Shea mentioned earlier that was motivated by Director Toss. Just the addition of town of Gibsons at this point. Perfect. Okay, so I've seen that moved. Can I have that seconded, that amendment? Thank you. All those in favor of the amendment of adding the town of Gibsons? Terrific. Thank you. Any opposed? No, everybody likes Gibsons today. That's great. And with that, I'm going to ask for, I'm going to call the question on the amended motion. All those in favor? Thank you. Any opposed? None? Great. That carries. Next up, we have Annex G, Community Resiliency Investment Program 2023 Fire Smart Community Funding and Supports Grant Application. I have Manager Trite, and I also see a couple of our, I see Chief Michael in the room as well, and then I see Chief Daly too, so great. So I'll start off with Manager Trite to introduce.
Thank you, Chair. I'll keep the introduction short as I know time's of the essence here. The Community Resiliency Investment Program was announced by the provincial government in 2018, and it's intended to reduce the risk of wildfires and mitigate their impacts. 100% of the funding, up to a maximum of $750,000, is available to the Sunshine Coast Regional District for a regional application. The application for grant funding requires a board resolution of support and resolutions from the partners to accompany the grant application. I want to express my thanks to Chief Michael for all the work he did on this. This was a very in-depth application, required a lot of time. I'm prepared to answer any questions the board may have regarding it.
Okay, Director McMahon.
Well, with the indulgence of the chair, I have a slightly off-topic question that came up last night at the Elphinstone Community Association meeting, and seeing Chief Michael in the room. One of the residents expressed dismay that the provincial fire ban was lifted recently, given our situation here on the Sunshine Coast right now. So the question was, do we have to follow the province? Can we just say, you're not having any fires?
Okay. Chief Michael, is there a quick answer for that question?
I should say that it's best that we work consistently with our partners, such as the BC Wildfire Service. And just because you can have a fire doesn't mean that you need to have a fire or should have a fire. So we need to maintain our safety in our region. And if that means not having one for the next little while, then that's what it maybe should be.
Director Beamish?
Yes, I'd like to move the recommendations on page 394.
Okay. And do I have a seconder for that? I see it seconded. Director Hiltz, did you have a question?
Yes, just a question on the list of the partners. some of the work, this is the Islands Trust topic. So not directly a partner, would it help to strengthen the regional aspect of it to include them? Because of the land use planning aspect of their role on the islands, and some of the work might be there as well. So help or not help, is the question.
Okay, I would look to...
And further, it might not even necessarily, yeah, whether it would need to be a resolution or not on the Islands Trust part, I don't know. Thanks.
Okay, look to staff for, go ahead, Chief Michael.
Yeah, I'm happy to take that on. I'm actually very excited about the opportunity to work with as many different partners as I can, including the Islands Trust. We've had quite a bit of conversation about that, and looking forward to seeing how we can support and potential to Islands Trust even have their own application to this, but we will certainly be working together on this project.
Okay, and would you require that to be part of the motion as well then?
I don't believe I need that to be part of the resolution.
Okay. Okay, well, if you need that amendment after, it will come to a board meeting near us soon. So we will leave that at that for right now, but we do have a motion on the floor, and I will call the question on that. All those in favor? Thank you. Any opposed? Nope, motion carries. Okay, next up, we have on page, sorry, as I scroll, page 399, once again, Manager Trite, Annex H, request for proposal, Half Moon Bay Fire Department self-contained breathing apparatus contract award.
Yes, thank you, Chair. So this, the self-contained breathing apparatus the firefighters use in Half Moon Bay, expiring as of next year, needs to be replaced. Went out to RFP, had 5 offerings, and they chose one of the ones from Electrogas in the amount of $176,312.50. So want to move forward with the resolution for the purchase and for additional funding from the operating reserves of Half Moon Bay Fire, Half Moon Bay Fire Protection.
Okay, terrific. I see Director McMahon and then Director Lee.
I would like to move the recommendations on page 399.
And do I have a seconder? I have a seconder. And Director Lee, do you have any questions?
Yes, actually, it's. I'm hoping it's all just curiosity, but when I look at the bids received, I see 2 from Electrogas. I was wondering, and 2 from Rocky Mountain Phoenix. I was wondering why 2 separate bids with 2 separate amounts. This is page 400.
Chair, I can answer that if you like.
Okay, I have Chief Daly on the line. Chief Daly, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks for the question. Both vendors had 2 different style units they proposed, not doing the exact same performance. So we were able to have several selections from each of those vendors.
Good. And my last question was, why operating reserves instead of capital reserves to pay for this?
That would be, I'm thinking CFO, would that be it? Or GM Hall?
Thank you. I probably can't speak with the eloquence of our CFO, but I believe that the capital reserves for this service are pretty much fully committed. And so the decision to use operating reserves helps protect future capacity for us as an organization to follow through on our 20-year capital plan. Thanks.
If I'm remembering correctly, we have a number of capital projects happening in Half Moon Bay with our fire department. So that would be, why it's that way instead. So with that, we do have the motion on the floor. It's been moved and seconded. All those in favor? Thank you. Any opposed? Motion carries. And then we have, last thing on here was Annex I, the request for proposal 2231203, garage hoist replacement contract award. And that is on page 401, is it? Yes, page 401 of the package. GM Gagnon is here to present or answer any questions. Go ahead,
Thank you, Chair.
GM Gagnon.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I think the report speaks for itself. I am happy to answer any questions. It's a fairly standard contract award. Thank you.
Okay. I'm not seeing any hands up to ask questions, so I'm going to ask for a motion to adopt the recommendations on page 401, please. So moved, seconded. Any further discussion? All those in favor? Thank you. Motion carries. Okay, so I'm just going to say to our attendees in the audience, if you have any questions, I will open that up for questions after we make the motion to go in camera. So I'm going to ask that the board that the public be excluded from attendance at the meeting in accordance with section 91K of the community charter, negotiations and related discussions respecting the proposed provision of a municipal service that at their preliminary stages and that in the view of the council could reasonably be expected to harm the interests of the municipality if they were held in public. So can I have a mover for that, please? So moved, seconded. All those in favor? Thank you. Motion carries. And Director Lee, I'm assuming you're going to ask that your alternate director be added into the in-camera discussion?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, and can I have a seconder for that? Thank you. All in favor? Thank you. Motion carries. Christine, I'm going to promote you to a panelist before we lock you out. And I'm also going to ask, did we have any questions come in from the audience during our meeting today? Anything from the audience within the boardroom?
We don't have anybody here.
Oh, okay. I was so disappointed. I have nobody with me either, so there you go. Okay. So, is everybody okay if we move directly into the in-camera? I'm just going to ask if everyone can secure anybody who is not with And welcome back to your regularly scheduled Committee of the Whole for Sunshine Coast Regional District on September 22nd, 2022. Thank you for staying with us. You're here just in the moment for us to ask for a motion to adjourn. May I have a motion to adjourn? And seconded. And do I have a vote on that? All in favor? Thank you. Any opposed? No? Motion carries. Thank you so much. And we will see you in just over an hour at board. Thanks, everyone.